Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to call to order this Board of Selectmen special meeting for Monday, April 28th. It is 5:32. We have one item on our agenda for today, and that's the CZW Master Plan Discussion. Collaborate Community Woodbridge Master Plan Discussion. So I'd like to just kick off the meeting by first outlining, just reminding everybody that we did send out the guide, and what we want to do today, I want to set the objective. The objective today is for us to identify a concept that we feel we can, as a group, deliver to the consultants, Cooper Robertson, specifically for them to then begin their thorough financial analysis of the different criteria or different concepts associated with that particular scenario that we opt to give them. They will then do, as I say, a rather intense look from a financial standpoint in terms of what the different options mean and can bring or cost and things of that nature, and put us in a position where we can start making decisions based on financials as well as on what we may want or what the community has indicated is their desires, etc. We will have an opportunity again to review those under that criteria. Once we have that information, we'll get to review it again and again provide them input and adjustments in terms of what we ultimately want. They will come back where we will have a last time view of it, and then they will present the plan. Another thing to remember is that this whole engagement is for us to develop a plan on how we approach what we do at the country club, not for us to define a specific development plan for the country club. And today's objective is for us to try to identify what we want, kind of what we want where, and how we want, what data we're looking to get back from the consultant so that we can make our next level of considerations. So if there are any questions or additional comments that folks want to make along those lines, I'll ask that you offer them now, please. Okay. Go on, Maria. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think I would just like to offer that from some of the feedback that I've heard from the community, I think that there is possibly a misconception on what the end product of this process is going to do for the town. And the end product, as I understand it, and it has been explained, is that this is a comprehensive land use strategy. This is a document that will give us some information so that when we then go and discuss with the town, well, what should we do? And we have to weigh financial decisions, conservation decisions, what we as a town want for recreation or not. We have the land use information in front of us, we have the financial information in front of us, and we have all of that information to help guide those decisions. What it is not is, when this process is all finished, this is not a development strategy. There is no shovel that's going in the ground at the end of this process. This is just a guide to help us understand what could be done with the property and all of the parameters around that, grants that we could get, an understanding of what market analysis is for certain parts of that, even for the recreation parts. And then we can have a discussion with the town about what we should do or could do with that information. So that's what's been guiding how I've been approaching this.
David?
Many of their plans were just layered on to one plan and just another layer.
Do you mean scenarios? Or?
The scenarios that Cooper Robertson had, it was like, okay, here's a green piece of land. Mm-hmm. Then we stick this on it, this on it, this on it. We build a hotel over here, and it was like Monopoly, right? It was just putting different things on it, changing the rents and all that. So it as a mathematical exercise, it seemed like, well, just go to whatever the most is and then start subtracting what the pieces are, because I'm assuming they have to give you the financial analysis on all the pieces that you include. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are some things that I just don't see us ever perhaps wanting to do with the property, because the expense would be very a great deal more than anything that we currently have, particularly if we're looking at all these other bonding projects that we have. So, 50 years from now, we might want to do it, but probably not in the next 5. And so maybe those are just ruled out, but, it's kind of, as long as we know what they're attaching to it, it does give us a sense. And the only thing that I had some cause to be concerned with was that it looked like a lot of their cost analysis was the net revenue piece was very similar to what a developer might show us. Okay, we'll get this much tax return and so on, and that may be true at the end of 10 or 15 years after it's all built out, but there wasn't really any analysis to the actual value that Andrea has asked for about what the real value of the land is as land. So I think in the end it's going to, if they can do more on that, that would be helpful.
They've indicated that they would. So I think they've heard that loud and clear at this point in time. So I think that'll be included in what they do.
I hope. I haven't had a chance, so I submitted 10 points of feedback / requests for a more thorough and sophisticated cost-benefit analysis. I have not had a chance just this afternoon. Cooper and Robertson submitted responses to each of those points. I have not had a chance to review their responses yet, but just from quickly reading their response to number 2, which was my request for integration of cost of services for certain land use, I'm not feeling totally satisfied with where they're landing on that, Mika. So I do wonder how much we're able to push back on our expectations and deliverables in that sense. And maybe I have a misunderstanding of what the consultants are capable of doing, but I thought based on current data of what it costs per average, average per household, let's say, to maintain service, to allocate town services, that they could extrapolate or apply those costs to whatever the proposed number of units might be in this plan. But what if I'm understanding their response here correctly? I'm not getting the sense that they're able to do that or interested in doing that.
They're not able to do it, and based on the discussions that I've had with them. And keep in mind, they're not doing like you say, on a per unit. They're not offering per units. They're offering us options in terms of housing. That's up to us in terms of what we do. So you can't offer something on a per unit basis, because it's not a plan it's not a development plan. So there's not
right.
There's not a finite or defined number of anything that you're putting on here. So from that perspective, it's what they do is they do have a I can't remember the name of the term, Tony. I don't know if you recall the expertise that they have available to them, and it's an individual who has a living. His main function is to define costs associated with exactly what you're asking for, like in your second question.
Oh.
And they have somebody who does that.
Oh.
But they can't say, well, scenario B will be this, because unless we're saying we want scenario B, tell us what it costs, because this is what we're gonna do. But that's not what this is about. So
Okay,
for
so
them to define that, we need to define something first.
understood. Yes, so I'm saying I'm hoping to have that for the next
That is part of what they do.
For the
That is-
next phase.
Yes, that is exactly.
Though, yeah, once we all have time to read their responses, I'm not sure that they are going to do that. And so all I'm saying is to Maria's and your opening remarks of this is to help us inform our, it's not a plan for the land, it's an implementation plan. It's information to help guide future planning decision making. That is information we need, or else this, I feel like, is...
They will base it, and what
Okay.
they've said is what we can do as a town, we can provide them input in terms of our costs. So they can help us define, with their expertise, the order of magnitude associated with different aspects of what you're describing.
Okay.
They can't tell us, or they shouldn't, and, in talking to them, I understand their rationale. And they'll explain this, obviously, when they come in next time that they're here, to everyone. But as soon as this is done, any of the costs that are there are irrelevant, because it all depends on when you do the projects.
Understood.
So that's why
But-
that's why they refer to the FIS. It's like at the time you're doing the project, what they're saying is it behooves the town to do the financial impact statements,
Mm-hmm.
or request that as part of our engagement with anybody we're working with.
Sure.
Because it'll be required at the time you're doing it, as opposed to now. But they will be providing us some information in regards to costs and things of that nature, and they are very much willing to work with us collaboratively to define costs that we share with them. In other words, when we talk to our public works, and when we talk to different aspects of what our town does in order to do that. And they'll be able to, I suspect they'll be able to do a better job explaining that when they come in, but they wanted to respond to your question without misleading. And it's like, no, you're gonna really have to get what you're looking for when you're ready to do the work. This isn't about doing the work, this is about identifying what you may wanna do, so we can give you some broad estimates as to what you can expect.
But I think, and we kind of ran into this a little bit with one of the other projects in town where I wanted some information, but I can't get information until something's actually proposed, and
That could be a hardship of ours to navigate when
Yeah.
it comes to decision making. If we don't have, I'd imagine there's some type of happy medium where, of course, the financial impact statement would be a necessary step if there's a proposal on the table. But whatever information we can have based on current actuality, because we have to know what it is per capita or at whatever level you want to look at it, what it costs to service residents in this town.
But it depends on in what area. What it costs us for police services on a per capita basis is different than what it costs us for human services.
Yeah, so let's add that all together and get some type of representative understanding between police, between public works. Of course, it's variable on how much it snows, for example,
Right.
but there's some baseline data I'm hoping to see.
So I think that this is,
And was led to believe we would see when
Yeah.
we selected this consultant.
but I also think when the time comes, that's sort of the benefit of having either a town manager or a town planner or some kind of, because I would imagine that those types of expertise fall within their ability to kind of project those types of things out.
Right now, don't we? Who could
And they are
help
working
with
with them on that, and I'm
Yeah.
sure they will help with that.
So for the purposes of this evening and the instructions that we have, the little document they've shared with us, they're talking about the comprehensive land use strategy, and they're bringing back that analogy of a bento box again. And I think I understand that we need to frame out the outside edges of the bento box so that they can figure out which pieces they're going to examine in more detail and then place into the box where they think it belongs. Then, when they bring it back to us, we still have the opportunity to take something back out of that bento box, but we're not going to have an opportunity to expand the frame or contract the frame, maybe contract and not expand. So those are some questions I have further into our discussion, because the idea of asking for all the details that we need to examine, but then keeping open the possibility that we may decide, once we examine those financial details and all the other pieces of it, that we're not going to go in that direction. So the question of whether what they send to us next is severable, which is sort of a contract term, right? So if they give us a plan, but it requires all the pieces to stay in the box, it's not severable. If they give us a plan and you can still pull out, let's say we decide, no housing on Ansonia Road acreage, pull that out, we can still run the calculation everything else will be valid, we'll be able to take that out of the box if we need to. So I think I understand that we still have some flexibility. So if we ask for all sorts of information, doesn't mean we're doing that. The audience should understand that doesn't mean we're doing it. But we need that for our calculations for our next step.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, additionally, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Additionally, for example, we've talked a lot about hospitality, specifically boutique hotel type of an arrangement or a brewery or something along those lines. They're also offering us the option, for example, if we want something on that, in that area, and we're not sure it should be a boutique, maybe it should be a assisted living facility, that they will help us to provide the financial understanding as to what that implication could mean. Not broadly, but if there's those types of changes that we want to make, so be it. So, for example, in my case, I'll just offer that I'm relatively curious as to why we are not, if there's a very specific physical and or other reason that we're not looking at that acreage across from Woodfield, on the other side of Woodfield, for any potential type use. And so I'd like to kind of open that up for some type of consideration, since it's been considered in the past for some type of developmental use. So is there something very specific? I remember when, I do recall they said early on that it was a lot of ledge there, it's not a great place to build.
Yeah.
But somebody was willing to do it, you know what I mean? So what does
The
that
right
mean?
developer could
Right.
make that work. But yeah, I recall too, they were feeling like it would be too challenging and therefore expensive to.
So that's not currently among our options.
No.
Can we put it back in play?
We can, yes, we
We can,
can put it
okay.
back in play. That's what they're looking for us to do, but they're looking for us to collectively not say, oh, here's something else to add to
Yeah.
everything else that we have on the table. They're looking for us to say, okay, that's something we definitely want in play as a group, for them to take a look at that.
So Mika, so I understand, on this one, it's labeled GS2. I just want to note, so that is the area from Woodfield to the Wilbur Cross.
Yes.
But I just want to note, that's not where the Toll Brother proposal had been. That was going to be across the street from that, in
Right.
this other green area,
More
right?
Closely to D2, I think. I don't think they were going to build on a ledge up there in the upper part.
Yeah, they weren't going to be on the
No,
other
there
side
was
of
ledge on
Woodfield
near
at all.
D2 as well, so, yeah.
Right.
It was up in that area, I do recall, but it was not, if you recall, that proposal was made while we had a golf course operational. So obviously it was not on golf course property, if you will. It wasn't
Right.
on any fairway or anything along those lines.
Right.
You know,
But
so,
the idea of, so there's no label for the area where the first Toll Brothers proposal had been. I don't think
Tony, I
of
think that's
that.
part of D2, wasn't it? Wasn't it?
Yeah, it was definitely part of D2, extended up into that green area a little.
Did it? Okay, so right now it looks like it's GS1, so green space 1 on this one. It's this is
Yeah,
where the
correct, yeah, right.
Toll
there,
Brothers
that
was.
area.
So, in my thinking, that's pretty much the heart of the
I
open
got
green
that. Thank you.
space and probably difficult to build on. And so I'm not that interested in building there. But I am very interested in hearing more about what's labeled GS2 on the other side of Woodfield. Because to me, that's, the highway's right there, there's not a lot, hopefully wildlife doesn't run out onto the highway, but that to me seems like a better buffer zone on the other side of Woodfield. That's a separate piece that I could see that hosting some development more than the other side of Woodfield.
So I like a thought, Sheila, and I agree with that about finding the different pieces and being able to take things in and out, at the final plan. And I think that's how I approached the sort of last assignment that we had when we, provided feedback. I'm the selectman that picked option D, and I did that because I thought we had this incredible opportunity
most.
with this grant to get the most information that we could about this property. And so that's why I chose that, because I wanted to see what would happen, when they did their analysis, what would happen in those areas so that we could either rule them in or rule them out as we went forward. So I think that this is our opportunity to see, ask that question, how we can move things in and out and get you know, to get the return on investment for this grant, to get the most information that we possibly can. With that said, when they've spoken about, and I think, David, you might have been hinting at this a little bit before as well, when they were speaking about active and passive recreation, I almost wonder, you know, in some ways when they even have been presenting it to the town and in workshops, if they get away from presenting like a specific thing, like we don't know what the market analysis of an ice rink or a pool or all of those things are going to be, or the cost of maintaining them. But if we leave it as active or passive recreation, then it could be any number of things. It could be, you know, a professional like dirt bike trail. It could be a, you know, a riding trail. It could be lots of different things. We don't necessarily, I don't want to tie us to a vision of what that recreation looks like. I think that's a conversation to have with the whole town after we find out where we could put whatever we can put on this property.
Yeah.
Good point.
So I have a recreation overall and our plan of conservation development and how that guides, you know, there's a whole section in there about recreation. And how many fields do we need? And if we were going to build another field, what kind of field would it be? And then where should it be located? Because there is the whole town. There's already 5 recreational facilities, areas already developed, sets of ball fields. So does it belong there? Does it belong on this property? I don't feel ready to make a decision of, you know, like selecting this property as the place that we would put anything in particular. Because the only things that I have noticed in our budget, I went back and looked at it, we have the 90-foot diamond is way out and it's not even in the capital budget any longer. And of course, we've been talking about an indoor pool associated with Beecher Road School potentially. I don't know where active recreation should be cited, and I don't think that this process is really going to be able to provide us with enough information. It could tell us what it would cost to put it on this property, but that doesn't help us when we have to consider there are other places where it might go as well. So that, to me, active recreation is one category, passive recreation is a different category, right? So I heard you say both active and passive, and I'm all for looking at areas of the property that might be passive recreation. But as soon as you get into active, you're talking about investing dollars, and then I don't know that it belongs there versus, you know, if we were talking about needing more tennis courts, more pickleball courts, maybe not here though. So I don't know that it would be helpful to know.
Where we could do it, like whether
Right.
we should do it here is the next conversation. But
Yeah, I
this
guess
is not
that-
from a land use perspective. This is just telling us where we could put
Yeah,
something
and
like
I guess a general understanding of what it costs to put in a tennis court where one doesn't currently exist, yeah, that would
The
be
one way to
helpful.
get that is for us to suggest that to them that, what would it cost to put it here? And then we would get it. We have a sense.
Yeah, and then
Because
we
we've
could
looked
decide
at-
we're taking
we've
that
looked
out
at
of the
upgrading
bento
it.
box and we're putting
And
it
it's
over
not
here
cheap.
instead.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's not cheap.
No, it's
Yeah,
really
but-
not cheap, and that was my concern with to go back to the what-if scenarios. Some of them are embedded in what-if restoration and remediation and then Woodfield Road development. We're talking about at least the nature center in that first piece.
Yeah, and I'm not sold on Cooper and Robertson's approach to what they're calling restoration, habitat restoration. I just,
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't, putting my professional cap on, it doesn't align or resonate. There's not a clear justification for their approach there, and I don't think it's,
Help me understand what you mean by their approach.
well, I'll do my best because I honestly, Mika, and looking at, you know, their charge for us today, and if selecting green space, they gave us like A through F options. I don't understand how they're picking and choosing 17 acres of what they're calling ecological restoration plus 10, 20, or 33 of enhanced habitat restoration. It seems without, and I tried to include this in my feedback to them, without greater, what I'm calling transparency in how they approached coming to this big red number provided under one in the what if scenarios. I don't understand how they're coming up with those acres in those locations. I know to a certain extent soils were considered, obviously the pond, but
I think
it's-
remediate in that what-if scenario includes tearing down the clubhouse.
and does it?
Not in terms of what they're talking about,
That's-
ecological restoration here. That's-
No, it says remediate contaminated areas. My understanding was that's tear down the clubhouse, and that's like $1 million,
Yeah.
at least.
Where, I'm sorry, where are you seeing remediate?
Right underneath restoration and remediate.
In the what if scenarios page, Mika.
sorry.
And
It's
that's
different
built into
page.
it.
Yeah, sorry, we're kind of,
That's a different document.
Right,
that
so
we're-
yeah.
they're both in the packet. So what do we make of this? Are we putting this aside because we don't have to stay? Everything is
question.
built on one here.
I'm not sure.
What's happening?
This is the presentation from the.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah, that's not-
the mini packet that we have. Okay.
Last presentation. I'm not
So I
sure
think
what-
those
what
were on
it's,
slides 46, 43.
Well, look at that, I'm gonna have a seizure.
Well, Andrea, I get your point in that we don't see in those calculations in the green space the work behind it.
Yeah, like
We
I don't know
we
how
see
this
the work.
number.
We don't see what they're referring to. So in
Yeah,
this,
I mean,
in this
it-
A through F, 2A through F, we're not seeing what the work is. So
Yeah.
likewise, I don't know
I don't get
what it is we're really choosing, or what
Me too.
you can say clearly there are these numbers of acres, but what that means on the property is hard to understand. We don't see the work behind it, and your questions that you sent in sort of speak to this. Is it's not really just the transparency; so we're not seeing the work.
Yes.
So it's hard for us to
Make
choose
informed-
to make an informed decision
Yeah.
when
Thank you, Steve.
and I share that. I don't.
So that I feel really limited in our ability to have a fruitful discussion on green space, for example, based on the preliminary information we were provided to guide that conversation. But I will participate as best I can in that discussion. But
To that point, though, I also read the feedback that conservation sent over, and I think as someone who, that is not my area of expertise, but I have a respect for that information and for what I don't know. And I think what I was looking for, and I know you had touched on that before as well, is not just the development area, but that area around it. That is, you can't consider it green space because there's
edge effects.
edge effects.
yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And so I guess one of the things that I was hoping to get from them, and we can still get, is what are those effects? Where does that extend that land into? Like how and
Great point.
and so I think that's what I was looking for, because that isn't my area of expertise, and I was looking for information like that. Like sometimes you don't know what questions to ask because that's not your. So that is limiting in its own way, but I was hoping to get that type of information so that when we get down to it, if we ask them to look at various options, when we get to that next phase to take things in or out of that bento box or in or out of that edge, we could use that information. So, I mean, I think that there's still time to get that information. Like we would know, okay, if we did this, but then the edge would extend over here, and we could make better decisions that way. But I think we can keep asking for that as we go along. Like, I don't know if that limits what the information we ask for today. Like, we can still ask them to do an analysis of certain types of things on this land with the idea that, in the next phase, if we get answers we don't like or don't think fit within what our goals and visions are, we can take those out.
Trying to understand what your,
Confusion is.
well, the ecological restoration and enhanced habitat restoration.
So
I'm very, my very uneducated, I'll use the words curated, and what degree of curated do you want?
So I think inherent to that is doing invasive species control, which is costly if you're
Right.
and it is particularly if you're not relying on volunteerism to do it. But the best example I could speak to, Mika, is the high costs associated with this pollinator pathway that was kind of presented as a scenario in the green space option. And I felt like the location where they mapped it, which I understand we can move around, but was a bit arbitrary. If they were intimately knowledgeable of the property, because we already have some fairly well-functioning pollinator habitat on that property that I think for a fraction of the cost that they estimated could be stewarded to be maximized in its function and value, without having to, like, mow what's there, cull things out, buy expensive plugs, plant them all, water them, and so that's why I don't feel like that's actually a tangible, our best interest as an approach.
When you said, but help me understand,
Yeah.
because what you're saying to me is what this process is all about.
Yeah,
It's like we know something they don't know.
okay,
So they're going to give us their data and their feedback and their input in terms of what they do know. And they've taken it from studies, they've taken it from information that we've given to them and however they came to their conclusions. We know something else, so we offer that. And we tell them, understand where you're coming from, but here's what we know. They make the adjustment. That's what I see this process as being. So I see that as, okay, that's great.
yeah.
That's what we want.
I hear you. I also feel like they've been given that information was reflected in the forestry report that was provided to them on day one. Also, to a certain extent, in the Audubon report that was provided to them.
And we discussed it at the December meeting when they first presented to us, because I know I went back to look, and we did ask a whole bunch of questions about how to value
the services,
Yeah.
ecological services.
exactly, and to sort of put a cost so that we can understand what maintaining, we're calling it green space here, or
Yeah.
whatever the definition is going to be. Obviously, since it was a golf course, and it stopped being a golf course 8 or 9 years ago, everything has gotten very wild. We've done very little to manage the property. We've done some work to manage the property. It's not without cost, but there's not been any extensive efforts over there. I think we all kind of feel that there needs to be something over there. We can't just let it go completely wild, because it is starting to have very negative effects in the invasives that are there and, just the look of the property at this point. So it does seem that going forward, whatever portion we're not going to develop does need a plan, and we need to understand the value of the acreage that will be part of that plan to know how we're going to go about managing it. Because it's going to cost money to manage it, even if we manage it in the lightest way possible.
Absolutely.
Which I kind of think is what we're going to do. I don't think that we can do, they're talking about many, many acres of, essentially, if I understood some of the slides they showed us, tearing it right down and replanting, which seems,
I don't think professionally, I don't think is necessary. What we need is selective.
I don't think the community is
invasive
expecting that either.
Control, and then if we want to kind of keep it in this meadow-esque early successional state, it's infrequent mowing.
Some areas, yeah.
In some areas.
And again, that's part of what we're trying
Yeah,
to decide.
so-
How much of that do we want to do that with? How much do we want to do something else
Okay.
with? And that's
Right.
actually what this is about. I can tell you that they indicated that they drew from the Southwest Conservation District's recommendations
Yeah.
for the pollinator pathway, both in scope and in location. That's where that came from. So,
And can you help me understand? Did the Southwest Conservation District come to this site? Did representatives from
I don't know that. It's a question we
Or
can
was
ask
it
them.
map based? Yeah.
So, I don't know.
So in terms of the information, I think we are still expecting to get a little bit more information about the areas that we're going to say in the bento box are going to be open space, green space, whatever we're going to label it. There's there's a sliding scale of cost involved in that, right? We could be doing a very light touch on that area. We could be doing some really intensive work in that area. I don't think I have a grasp right now of what would be appropriate because I don't understand the cost. That is, I think, the biggest issue here.
But we're trying to get to that. That's
Yeah.
what we're trying to do. For
But-
example,
But there's no
you've
costs
mentioned,
associated with this A through F. Like, what's
there
the
is
dollar
a-
amount of each one?
that's what they're going to tell us. What,
So I
give
guess-
us an indication as to
We're
which one.
deciding what we're most interested in receiving dollar amounts
Yes.
on.
Yes, exactly. So it's like, that's the whole point of this is, so if we're gonna receive a dollar amount, do you want it on 17 acres or do you want it on 50 acres? Do you want 17 acres of ecological and 33 acres of habitat, or do we want some other version of this? And your expertise should aid us in determining what direction we want to go. And you're saying, so which one would you prefer to take a look at?
Well, if we follow the kind of framework we're setting out here, the more information, the better. So the bigger scope, because you get a little economy of scale, maybe? I'm guessing.
Yeah, but
I don't know if that's
also
true.
want to know
It's
the
not always true.
cost.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
don't know.
always true.
But that's what they would tell us, right? So 17 acres is this, and an additional 30 acres is this.
Correct.
And we can see if that number scales.
Correct.
But those, I mean, in a comprehensive plan for the property, it might not all be the same treatment. So
It
we
likely
might,
wouldn't.
It likely wouldn't, exactly. So we
right.
might be doing, as you said, maintaining the species that are there, mowing and managing. But we might decide, and I'd be curious about this because I've shared the idea of an arboretum in this place. Very different than a pollinator pathway in terms of what's planted and how intensively that's managed, and whether
Yep.
we as the town end up managing that or we work with a partner to manage that might drastically change the cost. So that's I don't know that the town would want to take that on as an annual cost of managing that kind of space, but a partner agency, an existing nonprofit that we might want to partner with, very much could, because in creating a comprehensive land use strategy where people want to come to this place and explore, I think multiple things could be there, and multiple types of green space would be there too. So I'm struggling with this A through F as well for that reason. But I guess if we can put the multiple things in the bento box, I would like to note that I think an arboretum might be one of those things. A pollinator pathway is just an expensive undertaking to implement and maintain. But trees that flower from as early in the season with the very first witch hazels through the end of the season, is a type of pollinator habitat. It's different than what most people see as the pollinator pathway that has flowering herbaceous species of all kinds. But woody shrubs and trees are a very different thing that I would like to see.
I appreciate that homage paid to trees and woodlands as pollinator. They play a very key role in pollination in that
guess-
support.
In my mind, it's kind of important that we try to identify as a group to bring this to an exercise or a workshop type of a session, so that we can come to some sort of conclusions. All right. So one of the easiest things that I feel we can do is take a look at what they asked in the first the first item, indicating, okay, what do we want to use the land for? Do we want to use it for green space? Do we want to use it for active recreation? Do we want to use it for development? What do you want to put where? They've offered us different opportunities and ideas in terms of what could go where and why. So it's like, okay, so what do you, from your perspective, what do you feel is a direction we want to go with this type of thing in these particular circled areas that they've outlined?
With the thought that we would add in GS2 as well, which is on a different page.
Relative to GS2, I can understand if, Cooper Robinson takes a look at this and says, well, we've got 150 acres here. Where's the best place for development? You certainly don't start looking at the place that's going to cost a developer by far the most money to develop, like blasting and moving ledge, and when you've got acreage
Other areas.
right next to it that is just a normal thing. And I think before you're going to find a development that really wants to go in there, there would have to be, just thinking from the perspective of what a developer would want, a very high profit incentive to want to go in there and take on all those costs all the time and so forth. And so, there've got to be a lot of properties that people could search for in a lot of other towns that would be better than that in terms of, in terms of if we decide to have any level of development, we have to have a developer or
Correct.
number of developers who want to do it. So I can understand why that seems a little bit maybe unnecessary, because by the time, if we got a number, I can't imagine that would be something that people would be wanting
go
to
through.
develop until they're desperate for work.
But if we were to say we would like Cooper Robertson to develop the scenario of the GS2 area being developed, would they be able to tell us, no, there's no market for that at all? There's absolutely no one who's going to want to do that. Or there is a market, but you're going to have to settle for a lot less money because they're going to want the land a lot cheaper because they have to put so much more in order to make it profitable. Maybe that's the case.
My guess is yes, because they did say in one of my questions was about leasing the land, because I thought we wanted to explore the option of maintaining ownership.
Absolutely.
And in what I saw them present to us, I guess in March, was not representative of us retaining ownership, if I understood it correctly.
And they said that as well. They said that it wasn't.
And they said in their
Panning out.
response,
Yeah.
like
Did
they
they say that?
shared with
Yes.
us maybe at that time, which I guess I didn't remember, but that wasn't a viable, was not deemed viable in the current market, maintaining ownership.
Correct.
So right then and there, so I think that's an example of them doing precisely what you just asked if they would in
Yeah.
relative to G2 or 3.
But again, they didn't, they've labeled that GS2 as like, we're not looking at that.
Yeah.
And they may have eliminated it for exactly that same reason. They think there's absolutely no market.
David's explanation on it kind of makes me feel differently about it. I'm with you in terms of why look at it if it's going to be so difficult and there's all these other options that are available. Why would you look at that? The only reason to look at it is 'cause that's the only way. That's for us to say that's the only place we want to put anything. And if that's, you might as well also say, don't put anything
Don't put
anywhere.
anything, yeah.
You know what I mean? So is
Well,
what basically what they're
currently,
getting
there
at,
aren't
so.
any trails there. I mean, there's,
Yeah. Well, I
Right.
thought the topography
Well,
of the
it's
land didn't allow for
between a
any
road
of
and a
that.
highway.
So
it's-
that's one of the things they said too.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, and it could have been just my misunderstanding that there was other people who were interested in it, so that,
So I am very interested in getting the specs for that area. So if we can add that to our, what are we trying to do, Mika? We're trying to fill in
Fill
this
out
blue
a
box here?
table.
Yeah. So if we can add it at the bottom, GS2, and
I
say
think that's
for
just,
development?
that's just a question as to giving us the answer they, embellishing on the previous response that they already gave us. So I think that's just a question we give to them and say, what is your assessment on that area across from Woodfield
For development.
for development, as relates to development,
For
correct?
development, yeah.
Pertaining to development, with the goal, Mika, of doing, as you said, like a workshop type, let's write some things down. How are we navigating the maintenance of ownership?
How do you mean?
Meaning, as I just referenced, we had discussed wanting to maintain ownership in this kind of planning process. But based on Cooper and Robertson saying the market doesn't support that approach right now, is that something we still, like when we're talking about potential housing development here, or even other types of development, are we talking with the mindset that we would be retaining ownership? Because that's an important thing, I think, that we should be on the same page.
Yeah, is it off the
The
table or
consultant
not?
is, well, it's never off the table, it's our property. So
They
we can do
work
whatever
for
we
us,
want. They
so,
do work for us. They've
yes.
given us their response.
Yeah.
They've given us their response.
So I guess I'm asking that question. What are
So
we
we want to
doing?
see the work. It's this sort of continues to speak to that issue. So they've told us not, but I too have always shared this concern of if we're doing something with this property, I'd much prefer to see it be leased than sold,
Yes.
because once it's sold, it's out of our hands to
Yes.
decide what happens. So we might sell it with the intention that, okay, this thing is going to happen. The market for the buyer changes, and suddenly they want to do something else. Whereas if we have a lease,
That's-
it's a 50-year lease, it's a 99-year lease.
Right.
They have a time frame to do it. You can build those things into sales too, I suppose. But
Yes.
I'd be much more comfortable with a long-term lease than a
And,
sale.
our consultant responded that that's not something that the market would respond to right now. That's their answer to us. Still up to us in terms of what we want to do. And in terms of your question, you can very specifically define when you sell a property, what you want that property to be
Sure.
used for with contingencies and things of that nature. So, and that's if leasing was not an option to do anything we wanted at all, that's certainly an area that we would look at. But it's, they've answered it, that's ask and answer kind of thing.
Well, no, though, because yes, but if we are asking for this fleshed out cost benefit analysis, are the numbers associated with housing development going to be based on sale of land or retention?
The information they provide us will be based on sale, because that's the only thing that's marketable right now. So
But if
for us to
we're
tell
not
them we
willing
want
to explore that, shouldn't we have it based on on retaining ownership?
but if that's not a viable option, then what are we doing here?
Well, then maybe we don't do anything like that here because we want to retain ownership.
Well, we might not go forward with something, but we
Yeah.
want to.
Again,
We still need to get the analysis. So I take
Correct.
Mika's point.
Additionally, we can sell the property and make sure that it's done in such a way as to not lose complete control over what happens to it. That's still a viable option. And there are land use lawyers out there, such as
Al Smith.
Al Smith, who can walk us through that if we needed to. So that's what the consultant has told us, is that that's not a marketable option right now. So
Yeah.
their information will be based on sale, which is the only way we've ever looked at it in the past.
Is
To
that
my
true?
knowledge, none of the proposals we've looked at have been related to
I don't
lease.
believe so, no.
So,
Okay.
What,
And
and the numbers on the front page are 10-year
Yes.
numbers, is that right?
Yes.
keeping in mind that these numbers are numbers that they're still reviewing, because they were numbers that we input and we've said, maybe the stuff that we've got on there are not, these numbers aren't like,
No, I
gospel.
don't take these numbers at.
I think
Yeah,
if,
I mean,
I actually reject these numbers.
Are we talking about this page?
from my
Yeah,
from my
based on my
perspective,
10 points that I shared.
from my
They're not
perspective,
comprehensive of
No.
what the costs are, but,
they are reflective of, if you look at the first one versus the fourth one, yeah, you're gonna spend more money on the first one than you're gonna spend on the last one, so to
I
speak.
don't know that
Maybe.
that's true, Mika.
Yeah,
I
so-
really don't know that I believe that.
We've got two different approaches here in these two. So the what-if scenarios and the page with the blue box. But the
Yeah.
page with the blue box is the one that we're supposed to focus on today, right?
Yes.
So we're supposed to take areas, and they
Yes.
have one map with circles on it, but then they have, I think this is a better map with really clear labels of what the areas
Yeah,
are.
the one thing that's missing in the table, and I guess the one on page 5 that you prefer, Sheila, is the Eastern Connector.
So that's the very last item. It's item number 3 in the text here, and it basically says, do that last.
Right. I mean,
Right.
when I did my table, which I did in Excel, I just added that as a row because it seems like they want us to think of that. They want feedback on that too.
Well, they call it AG1 here, and they call it Eastern Connector here, so I'm not sure which is which.
AG1?
Yeah, right?
Okay.
Ag1 in the,
Yeah.
Map.
That is the,
Those were near to.
right?
AR1, active recreation, is that what you're looking
No,
at?
AG1 on
Ag
page
one,
5.
The little blue
Yep.
blob
Is
in the
that
middle.
Oh, yeah.
the same as Eastern
Yes.
Connector on page
Yes.
4?
If you look
I
at,
thought it
Not
was
quite.
not.
No, the Eastern Connector is more between D1 and
Like,
D2.
I don't know that they have a circle representing Eastern Connector.
They don't. Well, sort
They-
of that circle.
Is it this circle?
Yeah, I think
For-
all of those
For
represent-
purposes
go to
of the
circles.
exercise on this page here, the page with the
Those names
circles,
all go with
Tool
the
could
circles.
only be a
what they're
circle.
referring to as
There are
Eastern
5
Connector
circles and there are 5
is
circles.
indeed the AG one.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you for that
If you look at the
clarification.
circles and you look at if you look at the circle map and you look at the map next to it, they've got 5 circles in almost the exact same areas as the others. So it's really the same in
Yeah.
terms of, it's just one's called one thing and one's called another thing.
So in terms of geolocation, I'm very interested, having heard a lot from the community about developed versus undeveloped areas of the property. Obviously, AR2 and area of D2, currently developed. The former clubhouse is there, the former pool site is there, there's some parking lots, there's tennis courts, volleyball courts, parking across the street from that. That's where I'd like to see us concentrate, because in my mind, that's trading development for development, potentially. That's the least impactful to the rest of the property. In the end, I don't mind if we put some other things in the bento box just to get the costs. But in the end, if everything leaves the bento box and we're left with just developing around what is currently developed, I think that's a concept and an approach that we can bring to the town, and we may actually get more buy-in with an approach that is just redeveloping developed area and making clear that we're leaving the others in whatever level of management we want that open space to be, and that's separate conversations. But if we look at development centered on that part of Woodfield Road, I think we'll be heading in the right direction for that. So whatever we end up with tonight, as long as there's a piece that we could keep in the bento box that is development on Woodfield Road only, I'd be happy with that. I'll be ready to vote right now and leave the room. And
Yes, but I also think it's helpful to
I'm
get
trying to get us
that
out of
other-
here already.
No, I think that's a good area. I don't know if, Mika, we want to focus and go area by area, but I also think it's helpful to have some other information, because I think in doing that, when people come to us, they're like, well, did you think of this? And we have to be able to say, we thought of this, and the trade-off with, conservation, the trade-off with whatever the trade-offs are weren't viable enough or didn't meet the goals of our town.
Yeah.
But at least we'd have real information to do that, and not
Yeah.
just, I feel this shouldn't be that way, because that's not information we should use to
Right,
guide our town.
yeah, we really need to compare it to if we went even bigger and we were to develop portions that are not currently developed. What would that look like financially? So
Right.
I see what we're saying here.
Well, financially and the environmental impact, because
Right.
there's going to be a trade-off.
them both,
And so,
yeah.
right, and so to get all of the information that we want to get so that we can speak intelligently to that trade-off, I think is going to help us move forward.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I'll add that I am a little concerned that we won't get that environmental trade-off piece from these consultants, because we haven't gotten that, which,
Andrea, we haven't gotten any.
yeah, but I'm not sure when I've brought it up in meetings. And so I'm not saying, based on their responses to my inquiries and requests for applying monetary value to ecological services, they have not told me that they can do it. Have you heard something different?
No, but I also think that that's information that we can take into, because again, the end result of this is a land use strategy. There's no shovel that's going in the ground at the end of this. So we can get the information that we can get that's within their scope. And then I think, to what I said before, knowing what questions to ask
Yeah.
to make that a more comprehensive look, that's something we take into the next step when we try to find out what we should do with the information that we're given.
I think, Maria, just the what-if scenarios with numbers attached is quite misleading at best, because, for example, on restoration remediation, it just looks like this is what it's going to cost you to do it, right? And on the other side, it looks like this is what you get back after you do it.
Right. But there's
But
no benefit to the.
there's no benefit
Yeah.
re- realized in scenario 1, and there's no real cost recognized in scenarios 2, 3, and 4. Where
They are, I realize, they provided net numbers, meaning that there was costs associated.
well, I don't think they did.
Not
I mean,
cost of
they
services.
didn't do things like school analysis, right? So, for example, if for whatever reason, whether we have senior housing or some kind of housing, if somehow 10 more kids come into whatever we do over there, whether it's because somebody leaves their house over here and they still want to live in Woodbridge and they go over there, so 4 kids move into their house, whatever the reason for it, if we get 10 more kids in for 10 years, that's $2.5 million at current rate, just back to Amity schools. We're paying $26,000 per student over there in the Amity system. So you've got
We pay, I think it's around 17 to 20, but I understand your point. Let's not use numbers because.
but the numbers are on here and it's very misleading because, a few students can really throw the positive numbers out of whack.
Depending
Why
on what
don't
the
you-
circumstances.
Yeah.
Getting back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the meeting, the FIS that they're saying you need to do when you're doing the work that you're doing. Because you can't identify what those numbers are now without taking into consideration all of the other aspects of what's happening in the town and the other aspects of what can impact on those particular numbers. So that's why those types of studies have to be done at those times where you're doing the work. So from this perspective, we're identifying the criteria here, and we have the ability to have them show us their work, to tell us how they arrived at these particular numbers. So I don't think we need to worry about the numbers as much as we
Okay.
need to worry about the process.
Right.
And we're here to work on the process.
So-
And I think the numbers are not necessarily, or at least I would hope that they were not meant to be misleading. I just think that without seeing their work, they don't seem as comprehensive. But I think that's what we're here to get to, is they're going to give us the more comprehensive numbers on the areas that we pick. Like so I think we need to get to that. And, to echo what we were saying before, asking them to do predictions on things that haven't been proposed yet is, not generating the most accurate numbers. So to get to more accurate numbers, we need to come up with a scenario for them to fully analyze.
Right.
And there may be other layers that we need to add to that after we get those numbers, and that's fair as well.
To Sheila and Maria's point, we have, like you look at, whether you're looking at the what ifs, whether you're looking at the circles, whichever you're looking at, and you're talking about the bento box arrangement, what we need to let them know is what are we looking for in these particular areas, if anything, so that they can start to put the financials associated with those various options together.
So should we go area by area? How do you want to?
I think that
Approach this.
that would be a start.
Okay, so Sheila began with the Woodfield East and West, D2 and AR2, which I don't know, for the benefit of the people listening in, if we have this document to put
We have to
up.
switch, Allison, I don't know if the computer, you can switch
Is
it
that
up.
too much trouble, Allison, to,
Do you have the other set documents? Yeah, which email do you want me to send it to? I'll email that to them.
Yeah, because it's helpful to have this
I
up so
feel
people
like
know
they
what we're.
need to
Yeah,
know, they
Yeah.
deserve to know.
So
absolutely.
while we're
To you or to Nick?
While we're waiting for that, I did take a look at what they told us in December about the environmental evaluations. And we asked exactly that, could you elaborate on that? And they said they were looking into ways to assess the value of open space from multiple perspectives, environmental, economic, and social. For example, we could calculate how much carbon is sequestered by trees and vegetation on the site, what flood mitigation benefits the land provides, and the contributions to biodiversity. These are methodologies and tools that we'll be putting dollar values on. They definitely said
Okay.
that to us.
All right.
So
Thank you for
that's
putting
the next
that-
step, I think.
I can't wait for that.
Right.
I'm like really excited to get that
Yeah,
information.
so.
Thank you, Sheila, for looking back.
So, and I've been hearing kind of loud and clear, there's like a constant rumble in the community about conservation, right? So I think that in what we are about to decide in terms of areas, if we can just reflect back that we're hearing that carving the property up into many zones and having things happen on multiple zones versus trying to stay consolidated around the existing roads or the existing development that's there, I would like us to kind of loudly say that that's going to be our approach, and to guide Cooper Robertson to please try to minimize the spread of development. It currently
The
is
fragmentation.
already developed in AR and parts of D2, or
But
what
it
do we
looks
call
like
them?
that's what they,
They've done.
Woodfield
That's-
East,
I'm
Woodfield
trying to see
West.
where you're seeing something different, Sheila. because
Originally,
D-
Well, AR1 and D1,
Yes,
well, when we get it up there, it's going to be easier. Those are not currently developed, right?
but those are on the edge of roads. Those are
But
on the
they're-
edges of the property.
But I think I've heard, especially from conservation, you put backyards there and you put insecticides in your lawns, and then you put lighting, and then you put fences, and then you house cats or whatever it is. You're encroaching on parts of that you're hemming it in, and you're having those edge effects.
And I completely understand and appreciate that. But we're also hearing from people that I'm paying $3,000 more on my taxes this year because of revaluation, and how come the town's not doing something at the country club in order to mitigate that? Believe me, I'm hearing.
I'm
from
laughing.
a
That's
lot
that
of
balance
people
then.
from-
I'm hearing that too.
So
And
it's
I'm
like-
laughing because I don't know that houses are the answer to that.
No,
And it may
nor
not
do
be, but we
I,
need this-
But the
Yeah.
financial, finding out if it does is something that I think is a responsibility we have in terms of identifying if there's that balance there. And again, it's more, from my perspective, trying to find a balance.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, in terms of not segmenting it, keep in mind that AG 1, 4,
Yep.
is that 1?
AG1.
AG1 is more of a agricultural thing than it is a development thing.
That was
And that we could use or we don't need to use.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
that real quick? Because that was also unclear to me. In is the thought that that would be also sold to a farmer? Or, like,
No.
what are the logistics?
Again, it's up to
Up
us
to
to do what
us
we
to-
wanted, how we want to do it. It's just
Okay.
saying that if, for example, you have a boutique hotel,
Yeah.
having a agricultural type of a connecting.
Agrotourism.
Type of a destination might help, or
Okay.
it might be an appropriate thing. And also, that seems to be the area where they, from a soil standpoint, said that was a good area for planting specifically.
And I just want to be clear. So this is that area.
It's, yes,
Originally, I thought it was
No, it was
connecting the two rents.
It's always the top of the plateau.
It's just here.
If you think of the country club itself, it's a plateau. Go on, I'm sorry.
No. I mean, what you're saying, that connecting piece
Yeah.
is what I saw as the eastern connector.
That's what I thought too.
And but the Ag 1, the AG 1 is where they had talked about some kind of orchard or agriculture.
Okay.
But they're represented in these couple of diagrams as being the same, like
Okay.
the eastern. But
But-
that's not what I had gathered in terms
From-
of that they were not the same in the previous documents.
Isn't there
Eastern
some
connector was
environmental
connecting
remediation?
Right,
and
that's
Sylvia
why it
Road
was
to
called-
Woodfield.
Isn't this where the,
Yes.
the outbuildings that we tore down are? AG1 is kind of where
It's a little
the,
bit, there's some on top and there's some on side, but that's the general area where some of that
right,
is.
and so we need environmental remediation there, isn't there? There's pesticides and stuff that we're
Yeah,
don't.
well, it will depend what kind of,
Yeah.
know, yes, there needs to be an assessment, a deeper assessment of the.
Could
Yeah,
be
so
all raised
that's why I'm
beds.
confused why
or it
AG1
could be
is there.
trees.
Could be yeah.
You know, it depends what it depends what it is. I mean, those things can happen over time, but we would need a deeper assessment of it. So if I were taking that land on for an agricultural purpose, I would want to do an in-depth soil study of it before.
But wouldn't you
because
want better land than that?
I mean, sure, but
There's
No, I mean,
Farmer
like,
always
seriously.
wants better
Of course.
land.
keep
No,
in
but
mind,
you
the
deal with what
area
you-
where there were buildings and where they use the maintenance areas
Yeah.
are lower than what they're talking about here. They're talking about the very top of the hill there where it's right now, last time I was on there, it may be different now, but it was more like,
Driving range there.
a field, yeah, like where the driving range, the remediated, the storage area is more to the left of, if you think of the driving range, storage area is more to the left.
And
If you take the driving range and you take the clubhouse and you go straight down that way, that's the piece of property that they're talking about. And that's a higher level,
The highest part of the land.
the highest part of the property there. Exactly. So, yes, there's some
I always thought the highest
storage
part
areas.
was where you're talking about the connector is.
Yeah, but it was really,
That's
part- No,
really
that goes-
connecting
Yes.
Ansonia Road to Woodfield.
Yeah.
That was,
Not-
that
not
sort
in
of, it was
AG1.
more of an oblong.
Well, but
Yeah, so for our
is
discussion,
fairly
we're gonna refer to it as what's depicted as AG one?
I think so.
Okay. All right, so let's get back.
So, Leah, let's get back to the exercise here.
Let's start.
You know,
But get
so
back to
basically,
it,
that's,
I mean-
that's why, you know, I understand we all have our own opinions as to what we want to see here.
Yeah.
But what I think is important is that we identify these areas and we identify more or less what we want them to consider in these areas. So, for example, if we stay with AR1 and D1, AR being active recreation, are we looking for active recreation there? What are we really talking about in terms of active recreation? I will tell you that I'm at a point now where I see our better opportunities for indoor recreation, a facility, a building, structure, something along those lines, being elsewhere than the country club.
Yeah.
Okay?
I would agree.
Whether it's a pool, whether it's
Indoor
ice skating rink,
pickleball.
indoor ice skating rink. That's not to say that there's not a place where we can put an outdoor rink or something like the small, something,
That
or
was
whatever.
presented to
Flag or-
us.
So,
at
Yeah.
that-
right, you know, or something like a pavilion, or something that we can, has multiple uses. But, and on the D1 area, I do see that, I think that that's an area where we could potentially get information on housing, particular age-restricted type housing, because it would be less large, it would be
Yeah.
smaller, and
And there's a need.
there's a need, exactly.
So Mika, you're
you
saying
said D1?
D1.
Yeah.
D1, correct.
So
D1 but not AR1. You're
No,
saying
he said,
AR1,
no-
you know.
AR1 is like, I'll be honest, one of the things everybody, when we talk about that
Sledding.
corner, and when, with the, I can tell you what I'm hearing, you know, that we paved over Roger Sherman's home, is, you know, what people say to me, who are very sensitive to it. And, you know, and I hear a lot about our history about this, but what I don't hear are suggestions in terms of, so what can we do to kind of accentuate that history and actually make it into a positive thing? So my perspective is, yes, I think it would be great to have some sort of a field, not a sports field, but rather a space where people can congregate, but also have something, whether it's a small little, you know, historic,
nature center named after
nature
him,
center,
or-
but,
yeah.
you know, maybe that goes on history. I was up at the Bushnell Park, taking a walk on a nice day, and that beautiful fountain that they have there is, you know, when you pass it on a day like that, it's impacting. It really has an impact. So if you can do something like that, and we can organize groups, we can have friends of Roger Sherman, whatever that we want to call it. I also saw the display at the library for Earth Day. And it was, I mean, there is some history here, so why don't we do something about that? That's the conversation that I'd like to be having, not whether we should, you know, it's instead of development versus versus conservation, let's figure out what we want to do here that would make this more attractive to our residents. And that just seems to be an area where it's kind of open right now, it's kind of flat right now. What
I
can we
will
put there?
just add, so I appreciate that, and unlike AR2 and D2, AR1 has is a neighbor
There's
across the
people
street or
across the street.
homes. And I think we have to prioritize sensitivity to those homeowners who probably don't want to
Agreed.
live across from a ball field or something with bright lights on at night, or that could attract all of the hooligans that come from who know where. So I think we just need to consider that at that location more.
Something more subtle.
more than anything else. Or just open space, because if I recall correctly, you don't see it on this map, but that AR1 does overlap with some ag soils, which.
Yes, yes,
So
I remember them
that
saying that.
is also
That's
a
what Roger
valuable
Sherman
space
thought.
for the retention of open space and maybe more of that passive, like, reflection, acknowledgement, plaque with a
Like
bench.
historic/park.
Yeah,
Is that what we're talking about? Like a park entrance, maybe there's,
yeah.
Maybe even be a great place
Way to
for
go
like an
use the
outdoor
sledding
theater,
hill.
like Shakespeare in the Park, or
Yeah.
plays in the
so if
some
we were
sort of
to, if we
outdoor-
were to fill out our grid and call it historic/park, is that what you're thinking?
They
For
asked us
whatever that is,
to-
Ansonia West, AR1?
I think we have to use their so I think that is in Sodia Road West.
Yes, and that's exactly what I did. I put other on, when I did mine,
Okay.
I
For
put other.
primary?
For primary, and talked about just what I said to you, education center, Roger Sherman, things of that nature.
Oh, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I put green space, acknowledging that green space can accommodate what I'm hearing you say, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
not to the full extent, but like that passive approach to engaging with our surroundings. So not just maybe what it is now, but having lower impact, peaceful, quiet, quaint.
Yeah, it's an entrance to come and walk on the
yes.
trails and go sledding and
Yeah.
cross-country skiing or whatever you're gonna do.
So would
What
that
I
be
w-
like passive recreation or?
Yeah,
yeah.
very
But-
much like
but would you
passive
want
slash park.
Any kind of a structure, be it a statue, be it a building, be it a, whatever it may be, because if you're gonna have something like that, you want to
Right.
find out how much it's gonna be.
Well, they,
Or like
you know
a,
what?
out some kind of outdoor staging area or picnic area.
Yeah, so John Adamovich had said at one time a little like pavilion-type structure so that if you're sledding, you could also go sit in the pavilion and, they could have a campfire and you could, make s'mores or something. That sort of like use had already been envisioned for that area a long time ago.
And if it's broader, depending on being an agricultural, my vision is
Yeah.
maybe seasonal. You can't have you can decide to grow a pumpkin patch one year, so that you can have a pumpkin festival. or
Yeah, or you
something
could have a
along
hay
those
maze
lines.
brought
Yeah,
in.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
something along those lines. It gives you some latitude, it gives you some flexibility in terms of what to do, but it's kind of an
Yeah.
open space. It stays
A
stays
rustic
subtle.
pavilion, not
you
a
know,
big concrete
correct.
thing, but something that looks,
or something in tribute of the people who, where this land came from. Something along those lines.
yeah, that would be nice. So that's more like park slash, passive recreation,
Okay.
I think.
Steve,
So
were you-
passive recreation with some,
Yeah. I was gonna say, this was identified previously also as a natural entrance spot, and
Yes.
though on the map, one of the maps they had the a nature center sort of area down by the pond. I guess
With
I
the
would
red
want
square.
to. Maybe it makes sense for it to be near an entrance, and that people are
Yeah.
coming into a welcome
Yeah.
center, nature center, and then out into the rest of the
yeah,
property.
otherwise it's a very long walk
what
and
it-
you're
exactly.
disturbing the
Yeah.
habitat by,
Right.
I was
having
I
some
was
fill.
turned off by the nature center on
Yeah.
the pond.
Yeah.
That made me.
Yeah, exactly.
so maybe there's an
uncomfortable.
open air nature center.
There could be-
Also,
there could
I
be a
don't want to
pavilion there or
compete with
something, but-
Ansonia Nature Center, which I don't know if this would, but we should maybe
I think
contextualize
there's
it.
room for more. I mean,
Yeah.
as a somewhat nearby neighbor who
Yeah,
rides my
'cause you
bike over
do
there,
that,
I think there's room to be multiple
Okay.
nature
But then we
centers.
could definitely have a historic marker of some sort, and
Yeah.
this is very close to where the Roger Sherman
And the
house had
schoolhouse
been.
is not too far away either.
You
Down
could
in
move
Sonia.
the schoolhouse
You
to
could.
this property.
You could. You could.
You can definitely, they did it in
Oh, God.
Bethany.
And
They
there
moved
goes the cost.
the one that's up in Bethany on the school
Definitely costs more to
grounds.
build one.
Yeah.
So how specific do we, these are all phenomenal, thoughts and concepts to put in here. How specific do we need to be when we put this in here? Pavilion, historic site, passive recreation, can they build off of those?
Yes.
Or do we have to
That's
narrow
what-
it down to exactly?
That's what I would like to offer them.
Okay.
If they can't build off of those, I'd like them to tell us that. That's
Okay.
the way that I see it.
So who's writing this down while we?
Allison,
Okay. Thank you.
But
I'm
so
no-
far I don't have anything to stick in the rubric.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I correct?
Yeah,
We're still-
I think that is correct,
Well-
but I,
So-
or maybe, I don't know, Allison.
First,
Hustle.
let's start with, we are looking at 5 general areas as outlined on here. Okay?
Like this.
Yes.
Yes.
We are looking on that, so, and just in order,
that's 4.
in an effort to be somewhat organized, we'll use these maps and identify what we think
And
for
you're
each one.
currently discussing Ansonia Road West.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
AKA AR1.
Yeah.
So if
Just
there's
as a
meant to be.
caveat, I
On the
had
next page,
added,
on the next slide.
I had added through our discussion 2 other areas on that rubric, the GS2
Yeah.
and then the Eastern Connector AG1, which then left us with 6.
And, I mean, there is that big GS1, but I think that seems pretty obvious as,
Yeah.
okay.
Which
Yeah,
goes,
there are
I think-
details in that too of like what we're asking them to do.
Yeah.
for
Correct.
the analysis. of
And
that.
that's correct. That's where the other
Yeah.
stuff comes in.
Yeah.
So for Ansonia Road West, we've basically talked about passive recreation and some kind of entrance or nature center,
Historic
welcome-
/ park.
historic / park.
So
Right.
for the land use category, what am I putting in there?
Passive, I think,
Passive
passive recreation,
recreation.
but just
Yeah,
knowing there
and
could
then
be a.
maybe
I would
in
put, yes.
his-
And
I
then
put-
put historic / park so that
I
they-
would put parks, yeah, exactly. Park, historic / park is what I would put in there.
And then, so that's the primary land use, and then
Oh,
the
no, that's not
other
land
2
use,
boxes
yeah,
are meant to be like options, right? So maybe the other option is green space, and the last option is agriculture for that area?
Yeah, agriculture I think still fits in there.
Yeah.
Again, all that can be part of one.
Yeah.
Top
Thing that
preferred
happens
is
there.
historic / park entrance, because the primary land use is gonna be passive recreation. and the
primary
2
land use, yeah.
options are gonna be, one is gonna be historic park / entrance / nature center vision.
Correct.
And then 2 would be
Agriculture,
Yeah.
correct.
Yes?
Yes.
Or any
Yes.
combination
Can
of
we
both.
vote on that?
Yes.
We don't,
Well, we gotta, I think we gotta finish all of it and then
Well,
just
we
do
can,
one
we can,
vote.
we can,
Well, for,
we can do it. I don't think we need a motion, but let's at least all agree on it so that we know we're getting the group's opinion on this. And we don't always have to agree, so we will have to vote on some things because we may not come to the same conclusion. Ultimately, it will be what the most is. So, how does everybody feel about this?
That works.
Is there anybody who has a problem with this? Let me put it that way. I hearing none, I would say we're good on that one,
Okay.
okay?
We're locked in on that road.
All right.
So,
One down.
guys,
let's go to Ansonia Road East,
which is D1.
which is D1, correct?
1 out of 5.
So I'll kick us off. I did for my primary put green space. But as an alternate use, and in the concept of what primarily Sheila and Maria were saying earlier, I could see value in getting cottage style, small, lower density,
Lower
Housing.
cost.
lower cost. Yes, I think low cost housing is the only type of housing
Right.
we can and should consider here. So that's
Mika, we own this whole property. Any consideration to the thought that Woodbridge just takes on another Lucy Street type thing and that we
Yes.
do it
Yes.
ourselves as
Very much
opposed
so.
to getting a developer in
Like
to
we
do
were,
it?
they were saying leasing, and I specifically told them that, and I specifically asked them to look at Lucy Street because I still
Yeah.
think there's potential for us to lease property.
Well, that would be a different kind of income because all we really get in that case would be the rents and the government subsidies.
Keeping in mind what we did there, we did the lease, a developer developed the property.
Property, the
So
developer.
all we got is $1.
$1
once, maybe.
We gave them the.
We gave them
I'm
the
wondering
property.
if
That ends
I'm
up
wondering
property
if we
tax.
actually.
Whatever.
We got property,
I
we
just
still
want
get
the
property.
Property taxes, we get property taxes,
Yeah.
yes, we
Because they're
do.
not a nonprofit.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if we're the. I mean that would be great if there were a developer to take that on. But if not, could that be a town project? Could that be something that the town could hire a contractor, just do it, we own it? I mean, there'd be a cost.
We would become landlords.
We're landlords to a lot of people.
We would, then you're talking housing authority and you're talking a little bit more.
Well, yeah.
But yeah,
I mean,
in
it's-
answer to your question, yes, we can do that.
Right, but
It just,
it's likely not.
as long as
income
you're
then.
getting,
I'm sorry?
It's likely that all income generated from that has to be put back into it.
Into
So
it.
it's not net. So maybe we should ask them, price it out, show us what that would mean. Because we
That
would
was
solve
the
one
point.
problem, which
point was
is,
just, you know,
Yeah.
what,
And also,
if this is what it's gonna be, what are the various?
and what if we do
And then we could
establish
decide it might
a
be
trust
located somewhere else.
for affordable housing, and then that could help us pay for something along those lines.
I'm not sure. That's just something, and it's down the road a piece, and they might be able to provide us, or when I say they, Cooper
That's probably
Robertson might be
outside
able to
of
help us
their scope.
in terms of identifying it, because there's more involved in that than what
Yes.
we've talked about in the
Yeah.
past. More involved in that than what we're doing in Lucy Street, for example.
Yeah.
But it's not, but can it be done? Yes, it can be done, absolutely.
all right, so
So-
if we were to say that we want that explored for, did you say low-density housing, Andrea? Is that
Yeah, well,
the concept?
what I was saying is affordable senior housing, kind of cottage style, like lower impact, lower density,
Lower density.
smaller
But
in
senior,
nature.
not all.
Age
Correct.
restricted.
So age-restricted,
Lucy Street.
right.
Lucy
And-
Street is a little different.
But that's
Lucy Street
pretty
is
dense
elderly.
too.
Yeah.
And, there's difference between elderly and age restricted.
Right.
So that's the other thing to consider, and it's age is usually one of the differences. But on the elderly at Lucy Street, we do have a component that requires some of it be affordable,
Yeah.
which I would also like to see anything we do here, at least have that. But anyway,
So
just,
low-cost, age-restricted housing? Is
Yeah,
that
that
what we're
was my,
trying to
I
say?
mean, my primary vote was for green space. But understanding we're trying to get as much
We want the numbers.
information,
Right.
then that would be what I would advocate for.
So
But I'm just
low-cost,
one person.
age-restricted housing.
and I
No,
would,
I agree with that. I think, with this grant, I think we're not gonna be able to get all the information we want, but the information we can get from our consultants, I think we get the information, and then we're able to weigh our options after we have that information.
Right, so if we said low-cost, age-restricted housing, that could be either sale or lease.
and that's what, and I think we should add that, sale
Sale or
and or lease.
Of
Correct.
the land.
Yeah, land
Correct.
lease, let's call it. Yeah, all right. So if that's one option, another option is
Go on.
green space or agriculture there?
Was that, I don't remember, was that along that strip that was?
I've never
don't
heard them
think
say
so.
anything except housing
What's
or
interesting
not
is
housing.
that
No,
when
it's
they,
not
when they talked
accidents.
about this, I'm gonna try to go to
Yeah,
this
there you
map
go.
over here. When you're looking at D1 here, there were two scenarios in D1. There's one that just went across right where the fairway is.
Do you want me to bring up the other document that has those maps?
If you can do it quick.
Okay.
Okay, if you can do it quick, that'd be great.
Yeah, it wasn't
So
as
many
it didn't go all the way to the corner, is what you're
Oh, right.
saying?
There was
This
a
one.
couple of different scenarios.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
wanted to bring it up but as a result of a couple of different,
Oh, yeah,
because
that,
it brings up a couple of different opportunities, if you will, or,
yeah.
Can I ask a question?
of course,
AR1, is there a way for them to position that when they look at
Keep going.
D1? Is there a way
going.
for them to position
There,
that as
stop.
like a buffer zone between the green space?
And the homes,
Yeah.
potential homes.
See, now, that is way off the
That
road,
is a
though.
good, that is
Even
something
if
we need
that's
to-
like
So that's cutting way too far into
an
the
orchard
green
of
space.
Well,
trees that
what's
go
in-
across, or like some kind of buffer zone.
Wait,
let's go back to AR1 in a minute.
Yep.
What happened?
you go back.
No, the one you were just at, we'll go back to that in a minute. The one you just had a moment ago.
I know, I don't know what happened to it.
Escape, Allison.
Huh, escape?
Yeah. And then hit the tab in the middle of the top.
Uh-huh. Nope, that's not where I wanna be. I wanna be on this one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it flashed many
Getting my presentation.
pages.
You
That's
did it
okay.
too.
There we
Keep
go.
going, keep going.
There's
Keep
quite
going.
a few of them,
I
Matthew. It's
know.
okay.
One more, keep going, keep going. We're going to go between that one, not that one, the one before and this one here. And the only reason I want to bring this one up here,
So I'm gonna open this up and then
just,
you
no,
can
no, just
click
leave it
all
like,
you want.
okay. Well, okay. This one does, as Sheila said, this one cuts in a little bit more. And it does, there's a lot more lot more stuff.
I could have left the road.
What's interesting,
Yeah.
what interesting is you don't see it, obviously you don't see it from the road, which a number of people mentioned. And it also offers this, and I was just wondering, and this is more to the farmers and people who know agriculture better than I do, is that, does that provide us an opportunity to lease out to a farmer for cornfields? So that if you're driving on the street, what you see is the cornfields in front of houses as opposed to houses. And
But then
it's-
you break
But
up
then,
more
but
of the
what
land.
happens is it creeps deeper into the actual
Yeah.
green space of the property, which is the downside of it, so.
Yeah, and I'm a little concerned as well, that goes up a hill, and that is where there's like a naturally occurring spring right under the top.
Yeah, I remember they looked at that. I thought they said the spring was around this area here. Is when you had asked about it and they looked at it, but that's something we could ask about. I was just, and this is,
Yeah.
not to say this scenario, this is just the concept. From a concept standpoint, does it make more sense to put it a little farther in so the sight line in which you have the ability to do something here
You're gonna-
offers you some creativity and
So
some.
that's going up a hill though, Mika, so when you're
It's a
driving
slope.
by, you're gonna see those houses from the road, because they're up, they're elevated.
Mika, to answer
So
your
I'd rather see
question,
it closer.
and I'd
If
be-
we're exploring this,
Yeah,
I'd rather
yeah.
see it closer, so it's not.
Okay.
I would agree with that, and I'm curious to hear what Steve would say, but I would say the downside, Mika, outweighs those perceived benefits.
Okay, that's what I wanted to
Though
ask.
I appreciate the
So-
logic behind it.
Yeah, so that.
Steve, do you agree?
I do,
Okay.
I do, and I appreciate that they gave us that as an option
Yes.
for the sightlines, but I think better to have
So
that if
is-
any development.
This
closer
is
Is
to
what
there
we're-
a
this is more
scenario where
along
all the driveways are just on Ansonia Road and we don't have to put a road in?
We'd have to look, we'd really have to
Okay.
talk to a developer specific.
Okay.
I would think
We
there
can
should be.
We can ask them
A
to ask.
lot of
Langham-
They
driveways.
didn't.
Yeah.
I know, well, it doesn't have to be that many homes.
Well, right,
Well,
and
if they're cottage, like,
Or they could
Yeah.
be shared
they can
driveways.
be they can be shared. I mean, one of the advantages of some of the not assisted living, but affordable housing developments and senior living is that they're shared. They have a shared entryway and shared drive spaces.
Right, and this is,
But this is showing it on the interior. I think the exterior
hit the wrong one.
might,
Sorry, guys.
might be better.
I appreciate the design closer to the road as well.
Which are some of these.
I mean, there
Yeah.
are already
Yeah.
houses on the other side of the
Yeah.
street.
Exactly, with driveways.
Yeah, yeah.
And if these theoretical houses were built thoughtfully, it wouldn't have to take away from the aesthetic. Like the aesthetic might not be a consideration, you know.
And which is the reason I think senior housing is what works there.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
So,
But Mika, what we're seeing here is, so I guess maybe the blob here, the red blob, stretches to the corner, perhaps because that road exits, but the proposed homes do not go to the corner,
correct.
and I like that. I think what we would want priced out for us would not have homes going right up to that crazy intersection.
My
So-
other thought on this
If you
would
look at
be,
this square,
and I don't
it's a
know,
little better.
that,
'Cause
Yeah,
the-
it sort of
The
runs
one thing
into-
I'd like to avoid
Do
is
you want-
the actual
no, we're
spot
talking
where Roger Sherman's house was. So
Yes.
that is very close to it, but if we did this approach that was squared out like that, then you're keeping
Gotcha.
as your historic,
all right,
the spot where it was.
I'm looking at the,
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
There's pictures of it.
So I
this one actually is.
I would
what you're
prefer it to
talking
be more
about.
like this.
She- You know, Allison, what we're talking about is this
Yeah,
scenario with the fewer,
Might have been that.
fewer units. Like, this is double the units, but if you look at it,
Right,
if you look at this scenario here, it's farther back than the other one.
which is what Andrew's saying, right, and then
Yeah,
that.
this one goes a little further, if you see.
Yep. So that's
and this one
C1
stops.
dot A,
C1.A, in terms of the concept,
yes, of the
So-
style, where the housing is placed.
But that definitely knocks a whole line of trees down, existing
but
trees
there's-
in the other
No,
one.
There's a
Mika's
difference.
saying
no, no,
only
no,
one
I'm
half.
saying, use
Right.
One of the other designs shows it. This one shows
That
it.
one.
B2 shows it better. I think.
this one here,
Yes.
this one here, you're right,
Yes.
B1.
Okay, B2,
B1, B2 similar, but
B1, B2. B1 is the one that
oh,
has,
yeah, I'm thinking,
it doesn't go as far toward the corner.
okay, so B1.
So we're
Yeah.
looking more at B1.
Yeah, I think we-
All right.
for the purposes of getting financials and
Right.
looking at both selling it to a developer or land leasing it to a developer.
Well, and getting
doing
the
it ourselves.
environmental impact of what that would be. Because
Yeah.
that's gotta be
Yeah,
the trade-off
environmental
with the,
impact,
with the
whatever
financials and, right,
income that we would bring in.
right.
I think they probably, it looks to me like they've done some level of traffic study to decide to pull a road in rather than driveways. Because that's a very
That's a good
busy
point,
street.
Dave. You're right.
And that
That's what I was
intersection at
getting with
Johnson,
having one shared.
Yeah.
where Muffy lives, there are cars in her front yard almost once a week from collisions there where they run through the stop sign.
Right.
No, that's a dangerous intersection and a
Well,
high-speed road.
so they also said that five-way intersection where Rimmon Road and Ansonia and Park Lane all come together, they also said that they didn't think anything would have to happen there, but I'm sure people are going to be
Somebody had suggested
concerned.
a rotary.
Right.
They
Yeah,
didn't
well,
feel the
Oh.
rotary
We
was
could
being-
use a
Can
few of
we,
those.
yeah, we could use a lot of road.
Or a
Start with
stoplight.
speed bumps.
I mean, because that, I don't know if you guys commute through there, I do,
Yeah.
and it backs up really badly.
Yeah.
And you're gonna have people taking
Well,
a chance and you're
especially
gonna have more
if,
accidents.
Which way?
Bishop's Pond area
Rimmon
gets developed as well.
Up Rimmon backs up. And Sonia has the straight through, so they don't even
Yeah.
pause, they go flying.
Yeah, and
Okay,
Sonia and
well,
Johnson
on
have
ribbon
just a
trying to
line.
get
Let's,
So for D1.
Just adding volume in that area is gonna be difficult.
So to have Allison write down what we're gonna put
It'll
for
be a
D1.
challenge.
Here's what I have. Ansonia Road East or D1. Primary land use, I put development, top preferred, low density, low cost senior, similar to B1. Styled as B1.
And then
we need a secondary.
So for
I would
that,
say
for that sale or land lease, we want it in
Yeah.
like parens, right?
Secondary, I would say continuation of that passive.
Yeah, well, we got three
Green
boxes.
space.
I guess I don't care what order they're in because I just want the information. But
Got
green space as well. But I'm also interested in about low density, not age restricted. I'd like to have the analysis of that. I understand why people want to see mostly senior housing, but I'd love to also see
So would
a
that be
non-age
some
restricted
alternative?
another.
Housing.
That's my interest. I
Well-
mean, I'd like to have some analysis for some
But are we saying low density or low cost?
low cost, affordable.
Low cost, yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess there's.
And the only reason I
no,
agree
we
with
did
you-
say-
I did say low
I'm
density.
saying both. I'm saying both. Low
But the
density.
more density, the lower the cost. So we should be careful. If we say low cost, low density, that, I don't know how that's gonna work at all.
Well, I guess. So in our various scenarios, they're slightly different levels of density. So so for example, B1 is a different density than the C1A. You had it on both sides of the road. So
Yeah.
I guess
And you're right, Sheila, that,
I'm just saying similar to this, but not age restricted. I understand that has other implications, and that's what we should have information on, because we have a lack of housing diversity, and I think one of the other bits of housing diversity we could use is non-age restricted
workforce.
housing, so
Workforce.
workforce housing,
So-
and so I'd like information on it. If we're here to get information.
So
I'd
when
like
you say low
information.
density, you just mean.
I mean similar, the
Lower
same I mean,
numbers.
Lower
yeah,
numbers.
Yeah, the same. So we've
I
talked
mean,
about B1.
Okay.
If you're talking about a lower cost, duplexes, quadruplexes, those are the kinds of things that are
Yeah, that's what they
more
have here.
affordable.
Yeah.
They say 9 triplex, quadplex senior housing units.
May I
31
ask
units.
a question?
That's B1.
Because I understand your interest in getting that information. Would you feel like that is best suited for this location or
Well, it might be better
D2
suited over there.
or
But I guess we're getting the information. I mean, maybe there's another alternative to consider in the box, but for the 3 boxes,
okay.
That's it's just a different piece of information about a similar level of development that's reasonable there. But
the other approach would be to ask them what the difference would be
yeah,
for age restricted
or
versus
not.
And
non-age
not.
restricted.
I just think we should be gathering that information
Yeah.
as part
Yeah.
of this process.
Because we're looking
Age-restricted
for the
versus
same
not
type of
age-restricted.
structures.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if you
same
will.
same structures.
But we're just,
Age restricted
Good.
versus non.
That's, yeah.
okay, Allison,
Yeah.
if you could add that? Because I, along the lines of what Andrea said, my thing is, I am looking for higher density, non-age restricted. And that, but I'm looking at it on Woodfield as
Yeah.
opposed to.
Sure. I mean, I think it could go either, but that's, I'm looking just for the information on it.
You okay,
If we,
Allison?
if we have another box, if we have something else we want to put in that box, but I think the green space and those kinds of potential options,
Right.
are
So
things
do
that
we
seem to
also-
me to fit.
Are-
So that's what
for
those are the
the-
three I had.
Top preferred or alternate land use are we still thinking that,
Green space, passive rec.
what
Alternate.
about agriculture there?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking,
Yeah.
passive rec.
Though those aren't mapped, though I
Yeah.
know web soil samples really need to be taken.
Yeah.
But that area is not mapped as ag soils.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah, I mean, I
not to say it can't
Can't be done.
can't be.
Yeah, when I think about green space, I still think that ag is a possibility within green space.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it was a horse farm,
You know,
so
so
you don't
to
need,
me,
the soil quality for a horse farm is a
Yeah.
little different.
I
And that's
guess
still agricultural.
the cost inputs might be different.
yeah, but there's such a
But
range
if
depending on the
you-
ag you're doing
and
is like
exactly.
wildly different.
And
so,
if we have it as green space, we can always make it ag
yeah,
in the
and that's
future.
that's exactly.
And that's
Yeah.
yeah. You could really
So we just call it green space for now.
I think so.
right. So that,
All right, we're on
And then we'll have a direct
to
comparison. Okay. Yep.
D2.
So
D2, AKA Woodfield East.
so to be clear, that's where the abandoned tennis courts are.
It includes that area that, based on the map,
Does it also include the clubhouse or is that
no, that's more,
AR2?
that seems to me to be
Okay.
more AR2. You
Okay.
So D2 is,
guys want to take a quick break right now, or?
D2 seems to be more than what's currently developed, right? So this is taking in like the first fairway, right?
I think that includes the tennis courts, or does it expand beyond the tennis courts?
Yeah, it does.
It was hard for me to
too.
The
gauge.
tennis courts are on the road.
Yeah.
Right on the
Yeah,
road.
it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
hard to
but
go
this-
much beyond.
the
the
alley
tennis.
And then
goes
there's a
on the road.
cart path above
So
them.
in here,
This looks
on
like
this
it goes
one, I
about to
think
where the
I think
tower is.
That
the,
white box.
that white
Yeah,
box
that's
is
what
the
I
tennis
thought.
court. So it
And I
does
think
look
that's
like
that
it
actual path
expands.
there that goes
So let me
into-
throw
Yeah.
out something to you. Now that the
think.
weather is getting nicer, if the Board of Selectmen goes over and does a site walk, maybe, at some point? Because I think that, like, some of these maps are a little, when you go over there and you look at what areas we're talking about. So when I said, oh, if we build up on that hill, you're gonna see it from the road, go stand
Yeah.
at the roadway and look up and tell me you can see the hill, that means you'll be able to see the houses on the hill, right? But so maybe if we walk it, maybe after we get the next round, we go over and walk it.
Better do it soon, because as soon as it turns green, you won't see anything except
That's
that.
what I was gonna say.
All that
It's
invasive.
got to be in the winter if you really
brush
want
that's
to
there,
see.
because you're not gonna see
have
that
like a-
hill.
Yeah.
You'll just see.
But I think it would help because we haven't gone over and walked it.
So,
So this
Not
is
together as a
wood.
group, but I
Unless
think
you
some of
all
us have
want.
been over there.
my question here is between D2 and AR2,
East. This is Woodfield East.
this is Woodfield East and Woodfield West.
So
So I'm a little uncomfortable with how much of the property is being used here. I'd like to see it restricted a little bit more to, again, what I said, the part that's already developed. So where the tennis courts are, where there had been a little snack shack of some sort over by the tennis courts, and where the current clubhouse is, where the old pool had been. And then even up the hill towards where the maintenance facility had been, which I think I understand is where the remediation all has to happen, between the clubhouse and the maintenance facility, right?
That's more AR2.
Right, so I don't know that, because it's depicted so many different ways, if we could redraw this a little bit to keep it closer to the area that is currently developed. How many acres is the D2 AR AG1? We don't really know, right?
He's
We'd
got,
have
you got
to
to look at
back
another,
at the
another,
might be,
older
it's
Pretty
different.
complicated to do that.
Oh wait, no. We do well on the what if scenarios page. Though it might not be drawn to the same. Actually, it's not drawn. I'm sorry. No, it says 8 acres. Oh no, it says 16 acres. In number 4. But that might include
So
a bigger AR2.
Yeah, I think 3 looks like what's here because 3 has
yeah, I
the
didn't
yellow
see that.
AR2, and then the D2 more closely resembles.
Number 4.
Yeah.
So it's somewhere between, probably around 12 acres, maybe? Wait, D2.
I think it's bigger than that.
No, combined with AR2.
Yeah.
You think?
This says
The
So
total-
yes.
if you go back
this
to
says
that,
10 acres along Ansonia Road, but then it doesn't have this top piece here, like this little V that's on here.
Yeah.
So maybe if you add that, I think.
So if you roll back to the
Oh, yeah,
proposal
here it is. 12.
that came to us
You're
about the
12, yeah.
Roger Sherman Farm Preservation, there was a map. And I thought it was
You
15,
were right on.
and it was that whole area. I could be wrong.
The complete, on the what-ifs, if you look at number 4, the
Mm-hmm.
complete red down in that 4 area is, and Habitat,
16
5,
acres.
16 town cells, no, it's 16. 4 acres of recreation in the corner of Johnson and, yes, so it's about a total of 16 acres.
Though that
Um,
includes a larger AR2 area.
Right,
That
correct.
comes out
correct.
a little bit more.
That
So I
extends
would
out.
shave a few acres off, and that's a rough estimate of D2 and AR2, Sheila.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, 16, it's a total of 16 acres, and
So that was
some of it is not included in the AR2
Right.
or Woodfield West.
So
it's both sides.
I put,
This is
so Sheila, I'm not opposed to limiting, I support keeping it on the current footprint.
this goes all the way up to this point.
Or hear their logic for why they expanded it.
Right. So it seems, from my memory, it's about 10 acres that's currently developed. So if this is 17, it's bigger than that.
Yeah, I thought it was 15.
Yeah.
But either way,
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
thinking
if they
it's-
keep
it's-
if they keep their development
Oh,
plan
right.
to,
this is 12 acre. In number 2, it says town sells 12 acres at the former clubhouse area.
Yeah, and I'm thinking it's slightly more than 12. I'm thinking it's 13 or 14
Yeah.
acres, is what I'm thinking, because that mostly
no,
resembles.
no, you're fine.
The
Yep.
number 2 closely resembles the AR2 and D2,
Mm-hmm.
except that D2 is extended slightly
Right.
and goes more toward what number 4 shows in terms of the northeastern region.
So Sheila, I think you want the D2 to look more like what's depicted in number 2 in the what if scenarios.
Yeah, I mean,
hearing
and in my mind, it goes with the piece across the street that we've talked about adding in as GS2.
What goes with that? D2?
Yeah. I mean, if you're developing on one side of the street and the other side of the street, that makes more sense than trying to say, oh, we're going to do totally different things on either side of the street. Like, why not be ancillary use? So, for example, the example of having an assisted living, maybe the assisted living's on one side of the street and there's some workforce housing across the street.
My, yeah, I think that makes sense. I also feel like this is one of the only areas we could have some commercial, like, diversify our grand list a bit, and maybe
Well,
have.
assisted living would be kind of technically, it's both housing and
yeah.
commercial, right?
Well, yeah,
It's considered commercial.
it,
Right.
And they're
But people
pretty
I
live
big.
guess that's not how I'm
And they're
considering
pretty big
It might not
customers.
diversify our,
Yeah,
our
because
commercial.
we have a handful, a few, 3,
We do.
4,
We have 3. This will be 4. If we were to
So-
do something, it'd be 4.
and not to say that I don't support that. I'm just saying,
I understand.
This.
I think it's worth looking at, and one of the reasons
Yeah.
is I know that that's come up from a developer standpoint
What's- I'm
before.
sorry, the assisted?
Assisted
living.
living. Yeah.
If
And I
we
would say the
become like,
market
the,
is growing.
We become a assisted living hub.
Yeah.
But a lot of folks who want to do, I
That's not a
will
bad
also say
thing.
that people who want to, the folks who wanted to do assisted living are also interested in doing very nearby, age restricted.
Yeah.
Right, so that a family could, one spouse could be living in the condo and the other spouse could be getting services in assisted living and they're right next to each other. Which is a really nice, they have
I
it
didn't know that
in
was an expressed
orange.
interest. I've been hearing boutique hotel, like that type
So
of
have I.
approach to commercial, at least with Cooper and Robertson.
Yeah, I think we should look at that.
I
Maybe
do
that's
too.
the
I think that
secondary
would
use.
also help meet a need in this town that
And I think
otherwise
Cooper
lacks.
Robertson's opened the door for us to ask him to do that as well.
Yeah.
You know, looking at both, so I don't think there's any issue with that.
And I'd wonder if you were to do a combo, like, for example, you do the boutique hotel that might have some amenities for even non-hotel guests,
Workforce housing for the hotel.
and D2, and then AR2 have apartments, or like, would that, I don't know, would that work well together? Like, do people do
That's what we have to-
hotels and
That's what we'd have to rely on them to
homes
tell
next
us.
to, yeah,
That's what we have to, you know, we'd have to let them give us an idea
tell
on that.
us. And
So it looks like between the two, if I look between on our what if scenarios, scenario 2 and scenario 4. Scenario 2 says 12 acres along where the former clubhouse was, and scenario 4 has 16. Is it possible to ask them what are the possibilities of a boutique hotel on part of that, and then homes along the other part, along where the tennis courts, along the road where that development already is? Is that
You
two
missed me on that.
separate?
Yeah, I didn't follow you
Like,
on
are
that
you
one.
saying-
So in
Can
other
we-
words, like there's scenario 2 says is 12 acres along where the current clubhouse is. Scenario 4 says 16 acres, and I think those other 4 acres, in scenario 4 are the northeast corner, but then it's also the
spur that goes out. on
spur that
bottom.
goes
maybe.
out. I think I would want the information of it, can they do two different things there? So we can get the financial information about what it would be for assisted living or a boutique hotel. So we can get that information along with the housing information. that-
Yeah, maybe those are the two options.
Yeah.
Assisted living, boutique hotel,
And what about the housing?
D2. So I would like to see workforce housing with whichever happens, right? So if it's a hotel, workforce housing for the people who are going to work at the hotel. If it's assisted living, some units of workforce housing / some units of senior housing for folks that might move in.
My sense, it would be interesting to talk to them also about whether D1 and the housing that you're talking at, AR or D2, could be inter-exchanged. So if workforce housing is there, and if you're having, to me, if you're having, whether, and as I think about it, whether it's assisted living with boutique hotel or whatever, it's services, and you want your seniors to be, you want those folks to be within walking distance of that. So, you know, it seems like almost if you're putting things up there that would be services, particular commercial options, particular coffee house, someplace where people can sit, you want them to be able to walk there. And it's a different walk from, it's not that it's necessarily horrible, particularly if we clean up our trails, but it's, and then you have workforce housing that Steve, it would become, what you were describing becomes workforce housing
Yeah.
for all intent and purposes.
There really isn't any financial difference to those two, right?
I'm
Switching
thinking,
it around, maybe.
unless they tell us there is, I
Okay.
would think that there wouldn't be, David.
Doesn't sound
you
like
know?
it, but it
So
may.
keep in mind, we were talking about across the road too, on Woodfield, so that's certainly, that's very walkable. Like, I could see that becoming a spot where there are, maybe it's mixed use, right? So there's a couple of cafes or restaurants on the first floor and the housing is above it.
You're gonna
And
have
it backs
tell
up
us
to
in-
the highway.
Again, in
Is it kind-
conversations with folks who have just approached us in terms of doing stuff, the mixed-use discussion was always that they don't know that it's truly sustainable there. So, and again, Cooper Robertson can help us determine if that's the case or not.
On,
Well, we know that the banquet facility was barely sustainable there when it was run as a golf course.
Yeah.
So they may be right about
was
that.
it
There's a lot more
all
behind
those
that,
bar
though.
and bat mitzvahs I went to, and
Well,
Weddings.
because that was a happening place in my youth.
at its prime,
it
it was,
was-
but it was a different place.
It was my social hub.
Not enough to sustain the business.
Yeah,
But that was
apparently
because
so.
of the business. You have to remember, it became a public golf course at the worst possible time for golf. You know, so, as it turns out, we didn't know that at the time, but it's,
I guess,
and it also had, at that point in time, in terms of facility itself, had declined. You know, they were,
not
they weren't
maintaining
treating
it.
it the same way they had been before, so.
I would, in either of these uses we're discussing, like a benefit to me of the boutique hotel is it has a potential to have a wider spread impact, a broader impact on the town in terms of bringing people to the town,
Tourism, yeah.
in tourism, in even for townspeople to visit guests,
Spa services.
spa services, a cafe, whatever it might be, with the beautiful views of all the GS1 space that's we are so accustomed to beholding. So the downside about privatizing all of that
50 acres of which we ecologically restore and
potentially. But the downside about making that all privately, understanding assisted living is commercial, but is that then that impact is a little bit reduced to the townspeople. And that's something I consider just as someone who, that is one of the higher points of the property, and not to say you can't climb up it from the AR1 entrance area, but it would be nice, I think, in a perfect world for that to accommodate as many people as possible and not be totally privatized in nature. That's a thought.
So
the only thing that we haven't talked, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, in terms of what we're looking at here, they've kind of got this arbitrary Woodfield East, Woodfield West. Are we thinking of both of those pieces together and
I
these
certainly am.
uses?
I mean, it seems
Yeah.
like that should be
Just
developed
Woodfield.
comprehensively, like a plan for that should be comprehensive, so that
Yeah.
if it was
Yeah.
mostly hospitality focused, that it had a series.
complementary
of
uses.
Yeah, it should be complementary.
Which
And
would
then,
be U2, that would be AR2 and D2.
Yeah, although
As one.
in our,
Right.
in our,
I'm trying to put
yes.
everything area.
Thank you.
No, it's okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
our-
so
our-
And I
Woodfield Road
agree,
East
because
and
my
West
concern
together.
was like, if we do one thing here, who's gonna want to do that there? Like they do need to be thought of synergistically, or else we're
Yeah.
at risk
Yeah.
of setting each up for failure.
well, and I think
Well-
to extend that just a little bit further, what's on the Woodfield to Wilbur Cross section should be complementary to what's on the other side.
Sure.
So the entire, if we took all of that together and said the Woodfield frontage,
So that's what I was saying
Yeah.
before about like this 2 had 12 acres and 4 had 16. If I think the 16 is them combining both of those areas together to look at it as one comprehensive stretch.
D2 and
D2 and,
and
AR2.
so 16 on
but
that
for
side of the road.
Sheila,
and then
who's trying to,
another 4.
Sheila's advocating for adding GS2 to that.
I think
And,
it should all be one
and Sheila,
parcel.
I'm not opposed to that. I would also say having that wooded buffer from the Merritt might be considered a complementary use for the hotel or the homes to help reduce sound and sight. It's noisy, the Merritt. I wish people did the speed limit on it, but
Yeah.
they don't.
I'm going to guess if you put a row of adjoined houses, that's more of a sound barrier than trees.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be. But aesthetically, the buffer functions
Who
differently.
wants to live in them? If
Well,
you're the sound
You'd be
buffer.
surprised.
Yeah,
know.
no, I mean, that's why
There are
the
a lot of people
cost,
up and down the Merritt. who
but
would
the
like
market will
On
force the
95 with
cost down
trucks.
there.
Merritt
Yeah.
doesn't have trucks.
Because it's along the highway, so the
Yeah.
cost is lower. And so when we were talking about, some of the price tags on these things, that doesn't seem, like if I'm looking to move out of my current house because I want a lower cost option, it's more.
Yeah.
So-
No, I'm not opposed.
So
So
we do
do-
need to make some natural occurring affordable by, maybe it's not the most ideal place to put it, but
Right.
it would keep the cost down.
Right. Well, I do think we should add, and that's why I had added GS2 here, so we could ask them see what was feasible on that land. But for the discussion of Woodfield Road East and West, do we want to take those separately, or are we going to combine D2 and AR2 and give them a list of?
But we're, in essence, what we're doing is if we are making them the same, because in essence, what we've done so far in our discussion is we've taken out what we've been referring to as active recreation. And what
Yeah.
we've been referring to as active recreation is more a structural, indoor something, whatever it might be. And we're basically,
commercial.
so far,
Which could be commercial.
which could be commercial, correct, that could be commercial, exactly, could be private. God knows there's some very successful private pickleball places going on right now.
Yeah, or something
so-
like frozen ropes.
Yeah, with bars and restaurants as part of the whole facility,
So if we look at the use, it's development and it's boutique hotel /
Commercial.
agritourism / assisted, and then the next option's assisted living or recreation.
Yeah, I think hospitality kind of captures.
Hospitality.
That
Yeah.
hospitality.
I think
restaurant.
hospitality in
Hospitality
particular, because
/
we do-
recreation,
I
is that?
am, yeah.
Hospitality
together?
because we're not, I don't know,
Not
we're not
storefronts.
saying,
It's either,
Yeah.
assisted living is not anything to do with recreation, in my
yeah, yeah,
opinion.
yeah.
Assisted
I
living's
don't
a
know
type
if
of
rec
housing.
is the right, because, assisted living is housing.
It's housing.
Well, it's also commercial.
It's also commercial, so I think we say commercial.
But I think you want to say commercial hospitality, because in my
Yeah.
opinion, that takes in a brewery, that takes in
Yes.
what I just said, a
Anything's-
pickleball facility that you
Yeah.
can,
So
you can,
commercial hospitality, and then the other option is housing assisted living
housing assisted, and the other
You
option
are.
is
with workforce.
assisted
just-
living. When you say
just
housing
like I-
assisted living, I don't know what you mean.
So this
It's
is
helpful for me.
Assisted living.
Together, or this is just
Well, I
D2?
would.
And
this
workforce
to me is
housing.
Woodfield. I don't know
Workforce
why we're
senior.
going back with- to
Yeah, and
the-
the only other thing that hasn't
So
been touched on
Woodfield,
in terms
East
of
and
getting
West.
some input on
Woodfield
is density,
together, yeah, so.
an apartment building.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the workforce senior might be with the assisted living.
So it depends on what degree you want to, what
Yeah.
degree you want to do that in terms of quantities, and that's something that we should probably let them know. There's a difference between a
Yeah.
two-story apartment structure with maybe some mixed use or something along those lines, or 2 and 3-story, whatever, and what we're talking about on Ansonia Road.
Yeah, so I think that anything that goes between Woodfield and Wilbur Cross is probably gonna only be affordable if it is higher density.
Agreed.
But I think that if we're putting higher density anywhere on this property, that's the spot, because it's not as ecologically sensitive. It's between two.
It's not as ecologically
Corridors of traffic.
sensitive theoretically. I do think it serves some ecological value in, especially I'm looking at that Bishop Ponds area, which is right now with Bishop's Pond as it is,
Yeah, and that's
It
all
is-
conserved land.
it is valuable because
this is
it
Bishop's Pond here?
yes,
Okay.
because it
That's
creates greater connectivity, greater space for the wildlife, for example, utilizing
Yeah.
the pond.
And not building across the street from that, I think that's that area that we've decided we're not gonna ask them. That's where the
Yeah,
first told
I
us
think if the
problem was.
housing, if this proposed development on the GS2 side of the road is more roadside, and doesn't go so far back into the ledge.
Yeah,
you know.
because I think
Yeah,
it gets
because
very
of-
steep there too,
Yeah.
so.
I think that
The
makes-
part where the parking lot is currently,
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking of.
Do we
Yeah,
want to get costs associated with this area here?
GS2, I'm gonna have to list.
No, not the GS2.
I put it
GS2
separately
is-
on
saying,
my,
no, but
No,
Mika's
I'm
saying
saying
something
here.
different.
This is here where the tennis courts are.
No,
the
the tennis courts,
are
Mika,
under the two,
They're farther this way.
they're
over
on, at the
here?
bottom,
Yeah, they're
yes,
there.
that white,
I think
that's what
it.
they are.
Yeah, I think they're in that white space there.
That's
I
wooded
think that
acreage.
extends quite a bit beyond.
So
the
that
fence.
other little white spot at the top is the cell tower,
This is Celtic.
I was wondering,
which you have to, right, you have to do something with that cell tower, by the way.
who owns that cell tower?
What little
AT&T.
other area on the top?
Oh.
It's in D2, see if you go to, if you go to this D2
Oh,
red
this right here?
thing,
Yeah.
yeah.
I got you.
Oh, yeah, I see it, I have it here, and
So
there's
it
a little
has its own
access
little
to it.
access road, yeah.
Right.
If you wanna
So
see
that is
it
some,
on.
that's something we can talk about. We can talk about
Is
putting,
that Google?
and we are
This
talking
is
about,
Google Maps, and this is the wooded area, there's a cell tower.
Yep.
there's a tennis
Got it.
course. And so that's the acreage, Mika, you were pointing at,
Yep.
I believe.
Yep. Okay.
So
so
Toll
that's-
Brothers was gonna
They're
move
gonna
that
move the
cell
tower
tower.
over to GS2.
Yeah,
Oh. That's interesting.
so it's an existing condition.
So that offers, so in reality,
That's
that's
helpful.
like a housing opportunity would be here.
Could they move it right here so this could stop being a dead zone?
We'll fight you.
We're trying. We're gonna try that, we're gonna jump on that bandwagon again soon, believe me.
I tell you what, even with that cell tower there, you always lose service on Woodfield Road, right in front of it practically.
Yeah,
I
it's
wonder how
I
they,
know,
where they
it's
turn it
just-
to, where they turn it to, and
I don't know, the more I
I guess
see
it's still
this.
functional, I guess it's.
So Allison, what do we have to fill out for, if we keep Woodfield Road together?
So.
Do we have a, where are we? Do we
We
have a
can give them the
primary?
same.
So
Yeah,
you,
Woodfield,
here's what I
east,
have
west.
so far. Here's what, you're considering a land use for GS2 other than just as green space. So I'm gonna put a separate column for GS2 for them to flesh out some ideas, which I don't know that you guys have come to a consensus on that. I've combined Woodfield Road East and there's D2 and AR2 with Woodfield Road West. And I have development as the land use. Top preferred would be combination, some hospitality, commercial. And then I have, alternate preferred, higher density, example, workforce housing.
Well, assisted living, workforce,
Assisted living and workforce.
and senior
But
housing.
assisted living is commercial.
Yep, and the workforce supports it.
So then how would she write that? Commercial,
Well, just say assisted living and
If it's
then
assisted living, then you're
workforce.
looking at workforce housing to complement it.
And
And
then the
and senior
alternative-
housing too.
Yeah,
I'd like
well, I
all
guess we
three.
would want to know about senior housing too, if we
Well, if
decided.
I got a wish list, I could put all three out.
Yeah, because if we might decide nothing goes on the Ansonia Road side
and it all
And
goes.
senior
Where it is.
Right,
This is
so
the
we would
senior
wanna
housing that we're
have-
promising
right,
everybody.
Right, that D1 piece, I have that your top preferred would be low density housing, seniors, and to flesh out the difference between selling land versus leasing land. And for your alternative preferred would be varied, mixed use, low density housing of other kinds. Similar to B1, which is the map we're gonna
Right.
reference.
And Mika,
Right,
just
and
for
then
the
alternately
purposes of
green
this
space.
exercise, I mean, I understand. I was saying, we could end up deciding we don't want anything on Ansonia Road and that we want all these things to be around Woodfield. But do we need in this exercise to put senior housing both at Ansonia Road to get that information and at Woodfield? I mean, it seems like if we're getting information about senior housing, it's not gonna be vastly different
We'd have to ask them.
So I would
To
be
move it to the
interested in.
other-
to the other side.
Probably
I mean,
depends on
So-
how many.
So I would be interested in
units.
if we're doing assisted living with some independent senior housing adjoined to it, because that's a model. I've seen it. I know they
well,
have
that
it
might
in
be one
Orange.
developer. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
Elam Park
one
in
developer,
Cheshire as well
and
Yeah.
has that model
that actually that's the beauty of it.
Yes, exactly.
That doesn't
That's
cover
right.
12 acres,
as
so,
assisted living.
so there would be
There's also
something,
senior.
there
Oh,
would
you
be still
could.
workforce.
You
housing.
could. I mean, if you think
It
of
could, you're right,
Mapleville,
you're
I've
right.
received 2 proposals in the past for that very thing,
Just
Yeah.
the senior, I'm sorry, the assisted living and
with housing.
with the attached.
senior housing, yeah,
Senior
independent
housing.
senior living, it's called. And then
Right, so
adding
we're able to-
workforce to that is the thing I haven't seen, but I think
ELIM.
sounds like you might get somebody interested in that. Because it's very hard to keep staff at assisted living, and part of it is the unaffordability of being able to live anywhere near it. So that this sort of recognizes that workforce housing is something we lack, for sure,
Yeah.
in town, all over town, not just in this area. So I would like to see if we could do assisted living, workforce / independent senior housing together. And I do want to explore the option of maybe there's some senior housing somewhere else, and then we can look and see which is the better place to go.
I mean,
Because maybe that senior housing could be developed somewhere else in town that has sidewalks,
The
for example.
workforce housing is really important as well, though. That's-
Yeah.
And so,
And if we get those numbers, we might see what it
not to
takes.
confuse Allison or backtrack, but this concept of mixed use, which I know we've explored, at least maybe superficially might not be the best word, but for the business district, has there been thought to that in this type of location where there's a mix of commercial in a way that's not competing with the business district, but with a different type of housing than we than we don't have.
So maybe the hospitality idea, commercial/hospitality, maybe it's a boutique hotel and it's 2 restaurants.
Yeah.
That seems like it might be viable there. I think I heard them say that, A, you don't want to compete with your commercial district, and that it would be very hard to build up commercial there.
So that I
But
understand.
ancillary
Developers have
use?
indicated, developers I've spoken with have indicated mixed uses would be a challenge in this area in terms of being sustained.
Okay.
Because it usually works best where there's
Foot traffic.
many options for foot traffic. And it's being looked at in the business district way more than superficially.
Oh,
So
okay,
right
yeah,
now,
I said I
no,
don't know if that's the
you-
best
right.
word, but
But just so you know, it's
thank
definitely
you,
something
and I'm
that's.
happy to hear that. So that I understand correctly, the primary or top is, or there's a combo top now. It's both commercial hospitality and, because we're
Assisted.
combining the
Yeah.
acreage
Yep.
and that facilitated living situation. And then we'll trust that Cooper, or we'll ask Cooper and Robertson to tell us if that model of having one next to the other is viable. Does that make sense?
So you're thinking
That's one of the
both?
things that I think.
I'm
that's-
sorry?
They
You're
both-
thinking
they
both.
both-
I was thinking that it's one piece of property.
Oh, and it'd be one or the other.
And
No,
it
that's what I was
scales.
trying to ask. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't be both.
I
I would prefer one or the other.
I think we should ask them to scope out one or the other and then
Okay.
see.
So is one considered our top and one the alternate?
Doesn't matter.
I
mean,
think that's
we're
the
gonna
way we
get 'em
should
both.
approach it, because they've
Okay.
asked us to do a top and an alternate.
Okay,
think
I
that
was
makes sense.
misunderstanding. I thought.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be fine if we said commercial hospitality is top and then the alternate is assisted living. Let's call it assisted living campus, so that we remember that it's workforce and independent senior living.
And we would say hospitality campus.
Sure.
I mean, I guess, one of the things I
Hospitality,
think,
ecotourism.
well, right, thinking
Yeah.
holistically for the property, I mean, I think one of the things that might be attractive for this amazing park preserve that we're gonna have here is a place that people might get a cup of coffee or
Yes.
a lunch and then walk out into the park.
Yes.
And so that this, if this ended up being a boutique hotel that had various features, it might also be a place where there, people go out from there into this park.
Yeah.
As do people who go in there from that side to have lunch or have a dinner and then have a walk. So I wouldn't want it
Yeah.
to be solely the boutique hotel, but there
Right.
might be some complementary things that then,
Yeah.
within GS2, there's also assisted living or some kind of option that where people
Yeah, maybe
are
there's a
living.
restaurant for the
People-
public as well.
Exactly, that's open to the public,
Nice.
because I think those are things that we're lacking in town, and while maybe we don't want to fully compete with our business district, I think the thing that makes this space compelling is that it has a number of things that attracts
Yeah.
people, so that
Yeah.
after they go for work, you go for a bike ride, you have a place to park and
Yeah.
have
And
a
it's certainly
snack, have
been
a something.
traditional. You used to be
Yes.
able to go there and have a nice dining
Well, exactly.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So should
that's
we do-
not far from
Yeah.
historic use.
And I don't want to confuse it too much, but I think sometimes at hospitality places you have a tennis court or a pickleball
Yes.
court, or
Yeah. Absolutely,
a
yeah.
You
hotel
often
is going
do,
to
in
have
fact.
a few of these recreation
Yeah.
pieces.
But
so
those might be limited to guests.
they might be, but
Yeah.
it might also be to someone who has a town park pass, or
Yeah.
because it's built beyond the need of just that space, so that again it's a resource for all of our residents.
Okay.
Do we
I
want
may
to
be
go
a
to
distress.
class two?
I'm waiting to make
So-
my announcement for you guys to give me a thumbs up.
Okay.
And
Hospitality
I'm taking it
campus.
all in, and I'll
Yeah.
read you what I.
So if we said Woodfield Road, East, West, and GS2, that gives a lot of room to these concepts
Yeah,
that we're playing
yes.
with. Does that make sense? We just tell them, put it all together and,
It makes sense now that I understand there
one or
was
the
one
other.
or the other and
Yeah.
not both, because I was getting a little,
When you're saying one or the other, not both, you're talking about boutique hotel, assisted
versus
living?
assisted living.
correct.
Okay,
Correct.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely with you on
So I have for the area, I have East West GS2 primary use development, top preferred hospitality, commercial, alternate preferred, higher density assisted living workforce housing, age restricted campus.
All the words are there, yes. That's good. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That's good.
What were you gonna say?
Okay.
That gives them enough,
Connector.
right?
So
It took me a
those are-
second to put it all together because
Yeah.
we were also looking at what age restricted was going to be over there as well. Okay.
So that's the two options. There's 3 boxes there for this, right?
Oh,
No,
yeah.
Well,
so
development
our-
is the
our
land
development
use.
is the primary
Yeah,
land
okay,
use
so
is
yeah,
the
yeah.
type, and then the
Gotcha.
two
I
preferred
gotcha.
that fit into
Two
that,
options,
right?
yeah.
Because then we have passive recreation for Ansonia Road West is that first column, and then the 2 options we gave was, History Center, Nature Center, Grand Park entrance, and the alternative was agriculture.
Yep.
Right?
So does GS2 need its own
Or,
box
green
going
space.
across, or we're just gonna combine it with?
I'd combine
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I think
that
combine-
whole area,
Such a
look at that
sliver.
area and put
Yeah, I
these
think
uses in,
I think
right?
combining that is fair.
Such a sliver.
So and then the Eastern Connectors is our
Bless
next.
you.
Eastern connector, well, technically the next is
not on
for
that
all, whatever's left over, that's not in those bubbles, which would be GS1, would be, I guess, under number 2, one of these options. And then your Eastern connector there is AG1, it looks like to me, but it's not
Yeah.
the right shape really, but kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's drawn differently, and I feel like in
The
every
Eastern
different
connector,
version.
I think, is that next, the smaller circle left for you guys to talk about is Eastern.
Yeah.
AG1.
Right.
Yeah.
So just to jump off on this, 'cause it's not included in the Woodfield and GS2, but I want to say one of the ideas that we haven't talked about much here, but I have shared with folks along the way, is that there's a real need for early childhood education in our town and in greater New Haven. And I think also located at a park, at a nature facility, having a place for, 6 months old through pre-K is, there's a real need. We're lacking, I think 2,000 to 3,000 childcare spots, early child care spots, and a facility to do that at a nature-based place would be a real draw. And I would like in some way to ask Cooper Robertson to do a little market analysis for it. I mean, my kids are now out of that age group, but having spent, the previous years trying to get kids into spots and understanding the demand and the lack of space, and that last year Yale closed one of their child care facilities. There's a big demand, and it could be a really beautiful space. And again, being that community resource where if we can keep people in town and they can bring their young kids there until they're ready to go to Beecher, and then take advantage of the green space and the hospitality campus, I'd like to see some kind of nod to or analysis of what's possible there.
So is that something that could go with that commercial / hospitality?
It could. That's why I wanted to say it now.
Yeah.
It's not something
I mean-
we've talked about as a group, but it's something that I think it could really serve, our Woodbridge residents.
Yeah.
And would draw from neighboring towns if needed.
Have you seen the piece in Westville? They have a nursery school and workforce housing.
Yeah.
And that's what's
Right,
keeping it.
exactly. That's
together.
the sort of thing. So,
So you need
maybe the
workforce
senior
housing.
living doesn't work out, but
Yeah.
maybe the senior living doesn't work, but an early childhood education does. And
Yeah.
it's
Here
a real
or
need
somewhere
for
else
us.
in town. I mean,
Yes,
that's,
and it might be somewhere else, and then we get that information about
First-
some market analysis.
First Church is definitely looking at doing something from a daycare standpoint.
Yeah.
Right, so
So-
a
oh,
location there
they
could
back
be.
up to Alice
And
Newton.
yeah, and
And
they,
they
Well,
both,
and exactly, it's those
Yeah.
sorts of things that work really well. That's why we send
Yeah.
our kids to a place where it's right next to green space where they're out
Yeah.
all the time.
I mean, if they wanted to add workforce housing on their own property, that would be a change in, zoning or whatever, but that might be a very nice change in zoning. support
you
that.
mean the Woodbridge Park Association?
No, the church itself.
Oh,
First
If they
Church.
were to, I
I know
don't
it's
think they
something that's come up
currently
with their,
can have,
with them in the past and wasn't,
have people live there.
But Steve, you're not talking about that in the context of AG1.
I mean, I'm not. I really we left the
Oh,
place
I
where
see.
it could have
I'm
been.
sorry, I'm sorry.
I mean,
Okay.
I suppose it could be an AG1 again. Like you could have some garden space and green space and an early childhood education center. I didn't want to leave that
Or part
behind
of the
without
assisted
talking
living
about it.
could also be a
Yeah.
nursery
So
school as well.
to Sheila's point, yeah, it could totally fit in with the previous section, the Woodfield East West. And
Steve's expanding the wish list.
yes,
I
thank
like
you.
it.
That's what I'm doing. Hasn't come up, but I didn't want
Why
it to
not?
leave before
No.
so
Why
it
not?
seemed relevant to me.
appreciate it, Allison, if you don't mind making a note of it. Thank you. If we want to get onto AG1 just for a moment, this was the space that they were talking, they've generally referred to this as the orchard when we've talked about concepts and things of that nature, and I'm going to kind of defer on this one to those who know a little bit more about the agricultural piece of this than I do, as to, I don't have a lot of perspective here.
Yeah, I mean,
Because it seems to me it would be,
yeah.
if you're talking the kind of space, it seems like a great addition to a space if you do have if you do have some sort of commercial that's hospitality, that leans toward hospitality, it would be a great augment to that type of space.
Absolutely.
As to what would be the best augment, I have no idea. Does an apple orchard work better than a vineyard, than a
Again,
cornfield,
workforce
than
housing
a,
for the orchard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So-
Well, exactly, there's that issue. I mean, I think it really does depend on what happens in the neighboring space there, as well as the rest of the green space. So, I mean, we've talked numerous times about a brewery, but a brewery that also, is growing things on site, could bleed into that space. Or, we could have an orchard that has a cider brewery sort of space as well, a cider mill. That's the restaurant, that's where you're going to. So I think it really can connect to the commercial area, but it also could grow into the rest of the green space there too. So, an orchard business in isolation there doesn't really make sense to me, but connected to some of the other
Agreed.
things
It
there.
would have to complement the development
Exactly.
it's abutting.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not appropriate for that location. And another location where it might be appropriate would be near AR1, the historic park
Exactly,
area,
yeah.
where the land might even be easier to work, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it dovetails well with the history of the property. One thing to consider, with the impact of even ag on maybe lesser managed green space is chemical use. Orchards are rely pretty heavy on chemicals.
Yeah. Pesticides.
Yes. And so I'm not convinced this is the best site for an orchard for that reason. But there's so many other types of agriculture, and that can be explored. I think my approach to it is if it's value added to whatever goes on in AR, in the Woodfield area, or if it's value added to the historic park, I think it makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, the green space just as is probably most logical, because we can always revisit it
Right.
in the future for agricultural
Yeah.
purposes.
Plus, if it's agriculture, people can't go wandering through people's fields, right? So
Right,
we're
exactly.
restricting.
Yeah, and it
Well,
definitely depends on the owner, how that
Totally
would
depends.
work.
Yeah, they're gonna fence it.
Because the farmer would need access, and so in that respect, along Johnson might be most appropriate.
So is AG1, that's definitely leasing to a farmer? It's not,
That was one of the options I mentioned.
Yeah.
It's what, that's what they're asking us to decide if that's the direction we want to go or not. Sounds like it's not.
Yeah.
I think it really depends on what. I think it'd be nice if Cooper and Robertson can leave it as an option in the plan. It doesn't necessarily need to be priced out,
And-
but as a potential based on how things transpire with our hospitality, for example, or with that park.
Could we
I
ask
would ask-
them if they can that space be moved to the Johnson Road? Can we ask them, we want to leave a space like that, does it
Well-
necessarily have to be there?
Or more, in my opinion, Maria, just along the same lines. It's consistent with what you're saying. Whether it's moved or not, can they give us a sense for what it would cost to do it somewhere? And that would be the secondary place to look at it, as you're suggesting. My thought is just, would be great, since they're doing this analysis, for them to tell
get
us
the info.
something about what's involved with trying, whether it's and I don't, orchard versus anything, whatever the space may be. We do lease town property to our farmers. And maybe there's somebody who wants to put a lavender field. I know Christina does a lot of lavender, and maybe that's, down on Johnson, having a lavender field along Johnson road might be a beautiful thing, you know, and somebody might want to take care of that.
Has the
And it's
ag,
more accessible.
Mika, has the Agriculture Commission provided input in this way to this property, you know?
Yes, one of
Technical
the,
advisor.
yes.
Through, yeah, but do you, maybe I should have asked a different question. Do you recall what the agriculture or
So the one thing that I did listen to one of their meetings, and they said, you know, if it's agriculture, you can't have the public on an
Yeah.
agricultural field. So it is that they
Yeah.
were concerned about.
Well,
I mean,
it
it's a
depends what
struggle.
kind of-
I know on
Yeah.
Fitzgerald track, there's some challenges
Yeah.
with the public interface.
One of the other things she mentioned, though, is for this space, she felt that it should be, people should be part of it. You know, it shouldn't be
A
like
one-
something that
Yeah, it should be more
nobody-
community
right,
focused
nobody
agriculture.
participates
Like a
in.
private field.
It
Yeah.
should be more, you know, it's something that draws people to it as well.
I agree with that, to be honest. Though we do have a great community garden
Right.
area, and I don't think we need another community garden area. Also, we have lots that can accommodate
Right.
that in town.
Also, I mean, aesthetically, some people take care of their community garden plots
Better than others.
others, and so
Let's
it's
say differently. People have different
if
approaches.
you go,
I like the weeds in my community.
I
would
think
need
my
a
biggest
steward.
it would need a steward, and it would kind of depend on, you know, as it would kind of depend on what you wanted to do with that area. If you were using it to grow for, you know, to make sure you were selling what you were growing, or is that somewhere where we have, you know, a pumpkin patch every year and a strawberry field every year, you know, where, you know, it is meant for the community to go through and at those certain times of year.
Again,
Yeah.
if, in a situation like that, I do think Johnson Road is a better place for that as well, only because it's more accessible and it
But-
doesn't necessarily entail people being everywhere. You know,
So I guess the question is, can that,
Yeah, what are we gonna?
if there's an agricultural spot, is that the best spot for it, or can it go somewhere else? And then for AG1, it would be whatever complements what's there, even if what complements it is the extension of our green space. And if there is agricultural space, can that be moved and then,
So I guess there's two pieces that we want them to analyze, both what's economically going to make sense, but then what's impacting the environment, right? So something that might be very economical from an agricultural standpoint is going to have a big impact, like
Yeah.
an orchard, right? Too much
Yeah.
pesticide. So if we want them to look at both the financial and the environmental impact, do we want to give them that option to do that both at the Johnson Road corner and then also here, complementary to the development piece on Woodfield, or?
It
Maybe
is
just
true,
see what
because
they think about that.
environmentally,
Maybe they
the
think
natural earth is better than a farm, you know,
Right.
in practice.
So maybe
a farm
leaving
is
green
better
space.
than pavement, but you know, to put it basically. So I do think it would be valuable to have that information while we're trying to get all the information. And I do think the impact to a certain extent would vary based on the location. The problem is AG1 could really work well if, where it is, if it complements
Something else.
the development. Like I
Yeah.
love. Have you been to a brewery that
So,
overlooks a hop orchard?
So
You wouldn't call it
to
an
that
orchard.
end,
Yeah.
one of the options we have is hospitality. So why don't we say, with the hospitality
Hospitality.
option, we go with
Yeah.
AG1. With another option, we would look to do that somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that,
that sounds good.
And I think all of the GS1.
Hospitality for AG1.
AG1 goes
Yeah.
with hospitality,
As
Eastern Connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure is.
but as a complementary agricultural use,
Right, so,
not more impervious surface.
Got it.
Yeah.
Correct.
Hospitality, got it.
It has to be tied to that.
Tied, yes.
If it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay?
And I
Well,
would
we
just say,
haven't-
I think a lot of GS1 still could have agricultural options. You know, so when we get into the green space part of it, I think there's room for potential agriculture, but agriculture really is so wide. I still think, an arboretum could be called agriculture. So
Technically,
so,
forestry
yeah,
is
forest-
agriculture.
Yeah, so it's so that's. But I fully agree. As I said, the AG one connected to the hospitality is probably the best use there.
So the last thing
Have
that,
hospitality if tied to and can enhance agriculture.
Or it can enhance the
Complementary use.
Just a
complementary.
veg. agriculture if can complement hospitality.
Yeah.
Agriculture if can complement hospitality.
So I hate to
Got it.
add another wrinkle, we haven't talked about solar at all. And
Oh,
so
I thought-
solar might be something that works with
wasn't on our-
hospitality, or it works with assisted living,
I thought we kind of
net zero your
ditched,
building.
not ditched it, but because of the transfer station was,
Right.
I don't remember talking about that.
So,
in a
so I
while
would
here.
think that something like if assisted living wanted a net zero building, right? So they want
That's-
to put their own roof panels or something like that.
Roof panels, parking areas. I could see like
Parking
any
canopies,
Yeah.
yeah.
a
yeah.
parking port that seems like
Yeah.
there's already
But we're not thinking of this property for big
a solar farm. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So we sort of put that off the table. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking of it along the lines of whatever, if we develop, we try to develop, that's something that's very important to mention to them. If the development we're looking for is development that will consider that renewable energy.
Low impact development.
Low impact,
yeah,
exactly.
all of that.
So, of course,
So
it just
net
makes
zero
it
would
more
be great.
expensive and
It does.
harder to justify some of the affordable numbers we're
So,
looking for.
But that low impact
Well-
development is something that comes in for zoning regulations, right? And so they've cautioned us over and over that lots of these options require zoning regulation
Yeah.
change. That's when we could say, oh yeah, and what goes along in this new zoning is you gotta do low impact development techniques. Because we
So we
totally
have-
control that right now.
So we have green GS1.
We have to talk about.
Yep.
Right.
That's one I was gonna say, yeah, that's the last one. we were
That's the
looking
last
for.
one. Okay.
So that is select.
I'm thinking, I had asked them about,
Is that in the list?
No,
Could
it
I ask
actually
for the-
wasn't.
It's not in the list.
it is,
was
number two.
select top preference for
Number two.
Eastern
Oh.
Connector.
Number
Skipped
two,
right over it.
number two,
All right,
Oh.
number
No.
two.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
it just doesn't say what we're talking about.
the
What
most.
is the difference between ecological restoration and enhanced habitat
Yeah.
restoration?
So that goes back to Cooper and Robertson nomenclature that, so professionally,
Okay.
this isn't written,
Okay.
because they were trying to be thoughtful. And do you remember, so that was from which meeting where they described the difference between enhanced versus,
I thought we came down to it was just words.
yeah, yeah.
So it still is with this list,
So I'm gonna,
as far as I can tell.
I'm gonna throw it out there that we do 2A. I mean, because by the pure logic that I don't understand B through E.
Well, I'd be very concerned about doing that, because if there's anything that we do need to do, whether it's just basic remediation like you mentioned, and we're not getting volunteers and we have to pay for it, we want to know how much it's going to
Well,
cost.
actually, thank you for saying that, Mika, because what I did want to say is what would be valuable is to get a cost of invasive control at a minimum on all the acres, but on a staggered payment plan. Like, you're never going to do 100 acres of invasive control at once. You do it incrementally. And it should dovetail other practices, and we wouldn't want to do it all at once until we knew what else we were doing with that green space, if anything. So I do think it would be valuable to get the in terms of green space costs, invasive control integrated, just as it's valuable to get the benefits of green space retention somehow monetized, as we have discussed kind of all along.
So do we think if we pick like C, we're gonna get two discrete costs, then we can see what the difference is between them and then apply it like multiply by 10 if we're trying to do.
But my confusion
times
to
the
that is,
space.
does that mean that that's only 27 acres of green space?
That's what it means,
No,
yeah.
you've got all
just-
all the acres, how much are we
17 plus
focusing on?
10.
How much are we getting a number for
For 10 years.
over the course of 10 years, over the
And
course of
this
10
is
years?
assuming our town managing it.
Correct.
I mean, because what I would really be interested in is seeing, as I said earlier, a partner potentially doing this. If we were to partner with an organization, if we were to have a long-term lease, someone else could turn this into a park. Maybe the town of Woodbridge doesn't want to spend the money to design a wonderful park here, but maybe a partner does. And I don't know how we get that
State of
analysis. Well, the state of Connecticut, another nonprofit maybe, but
Yep.
somebody might want to design a park. I would like to know if there's someone who might want to do that.
Yeah, so do we have the ability to do that with this GS one?
So,
Say our intention is, it's a park, so it needs all
We-
these invasive control kind of.
When we said we would do
Management.
this, we wanted to take a look at, one of the things I know was very important to me is take a look at the entire property. So, okay, we've more or less identified 25 acres of stuff we want to do that we've identified could be done on that property. Now we've got this other property that we haven't really said anything about what we're going to do with. And I think this is speaking to that. It's speaking to, okay, so you want to really, over the next 10 years, work on the property as a whole. How much of the restoration and what extent of the restoration do you want to do? The enhance, like to me, it's rather than having Adam and his team go out there and mow the property, so there's some trails and try to maintain to some degree the trail system. You're actually going to take proactive action, you're proactively going to go out there and clean up and do things
You
that
need
are
an
enhanced.
open space management plan.
Right.
Right, so there's
right.
one that was made for Fitzgerald and Alice Newton together. That was made by the School of the Environment. But it wasn't done, right? So I think what we're saying here is that we need an open space management plan and/or partner
yeah.
for open space management.
Yeah, well, I would say not just open space management plan, because that sort of speaks to it potentially staying the same. I'm saying park design. I mean,
Development,
if we
yeah.
want to have, a bike trail that connects areas or nice walking trails, I mean, that's design work. And it's, we're not going to be,
Development.
altering the landscape per
design.
se, but we might be, planting some forestry for it. It's not just managing what's there.
Right,
I
so
think
park
it's-
design
park design.
and management.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say park design and habitat
And habitat
management.
management, right,
Because what I wouldn't advocate for, which I don't think you are, but is mowing it all and keeping it grass with some pretty trees and nice pathways. That's not ecologically valuable. Again, better than it all being pavement, but not better than what it is right now, honestly.
So how much of it would we want to do that with?
Well,
All of GS1.
yeah, I mean,
The plan should be comprehensive, just as you said, Mika.
Have to be.
Inclusive of all the acres, and the plan can identify the best areas for meadow and early successional habitat
Phasing.
versus in
Yeah.
phases versus the bike activity area or whatever.
So we don't want to get numbers related to physical activity with regard to the property that currently is minimally maintained.
Well, if our approach is to say we have a plan for the entire property, we have to have something, some level of the plan has to touch the entire GS1, right? These options don't do that, right? None of those options add up to whatever acreage we're talking about. It's like 100 acres, right?
Yeah.
So, but we do need, what we're talking about, we do need to cover that whole area, because you can't
There's
one part of it go
acreage,
out.
to my way of thinking, there's acres that we're not going to do anything with, like, whatever. And then there's
where the Toll Brothers
acreage-
originally was going to be,
Right.
right? Literally, no one's touched that, and no one's going to touch it.
Right. So I guess my question is, if you look at the options A to F, what option are we looking at? Do we pick the middle one to get something so we have some sense of what's going on? Or do we pick something more and we say, you know what, we're eventually going to do 80 of the 100 acres we're gonna manage in some way, shape, or form, and we wanna know what, by today's dollars, what that's gonna cost.
Yeah.
So we have a sense for that, or is 50 enough, or is, what is it, 37 enough, or is 27 enough? I think the only difference here is just in terms of how extensively we wanna get a number for. Understanding that what they're talking about is curating the property
Well-
to some degree, my term, maybe it's the wrong term, but.
What do
what's
you want to
F?
manage? Because
Well, F is we come up with our own.
Yeah.
And
guess
so
that's
which
what I'm
maybe
trying to
that's what we're
propose.
trying to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm trying to
do.
propose with F.
But a plan is different, putting together a plan is different than, it's just what we're doing now. We're putting together a plan, so we're having these discussions.
Right.
When we're ready to do the work, that's a whole different.
Sure.
That's a whole
But it
different
could
story.
be, this sounds.
Shamika, you want the cost of what the work would be.
They're offering us an
In-
opportunity to get the cost for what
But
the work would
also,
be.
we can have integrated, what is the cost of having a plan? Not this CCW master plan, but
I
a
think it's-
green space management plan.
Totally agree, and I think that's a great
Habitat
idea. I think it's a really good thought and something we should ask them for.
Yes, I think
In
that
addition
should-
to,
well, what about
And then
Right now-
phase the work.
what we're not doing very much of is maintaining it. And before we can launch on any of these other things, that would kind of be one of the things we would look at first. It is, if nothing else, just look at the perimeter area and what do you have to do to make it look so that doesn't become a dumping area.
right.
So we don't have any more people dropping dead bodies off on Woodfield, and we don't have any more boats that suddenly end up parked somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Just because that's the kinds of things that happen to vacant lots. They become dumping areas for old tires and all that kind of stuff. So the maintenance of it may in fact be more timely critical, and so we ought to know what that's going
Gonna
to
cost. That might be one of the first things we do, David. You're absolutely right. In terms of certain areas, we might say we've got to care for this area. So let's find out what it's going to cost us to kind of do that. Considering also, one of the things that they're going to also offer us some assistance with is, are there grants that can help us make this happen?
Yes, because there are.
Or partners.
And,
And if you're going to go for a grant, you better know how much money you want to spend.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, I think the areas that you would look to focus on would be Johnson and Ansonia Road part because
exposure.
it's very public.
I agree.
And maybe the part of Woodfield where it looks kind of deserted because those are the kinds of things where people might decide to start towing their old refrigerators and mattresses and dumping them there as opposed to using a more proper facility.
So 17 acres and 20 acres, is that?
Well,
What I got to tell you, what I'm confused about is the 17 acres.
I am
know
too.
there's something specific about that I'm sure
I
I just
don't
don't remember.
understand, and I wish they were here for us to ask. So I'm thinking, let's come up with our own, not limit ourselves to the B through E, and rely on F, which is just other, and we provide the acres.
So we have to do
Yeah,
that
that's
now.
what I'm trying. Yeah. So just from my perspective, there's a valuable pond, ecologically valuable pond here, and I think this portion of the park, of the property, is the least now touched, proposed touched. Obviously nothing, no shovels. As Maria
Wetlands
was saying.
area?
Yes, the wetlands area.
And I think focusing, and I guess I think focusing our efforts maybe in that area first would make the most ecological sense because it's
Nothing disturbing.
there's nothing really disturbing it. Like, why would we get costs for the areas surrounding D2 and AR2 or D1 and AR1 until
We know
what we're doing there?
You referred to what if scenario 4. What if scenario 4, and you look at the Woodfield Road, the pink on the Woodfield Road side of that, and you kind of extrapolate that and put that in the area where you're talking about, I'm using it to judge acreage.
Oh, okay, so you're saying
So,
that's about 17 acres?
Figure it about, that might be where the
seven.
17 acres comes from, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
In that area there, so that's saying 17 acres of, and I'm assuming that that would be, like you said, ecological restoration. So then it's, okay, let's figure that. They're saying, okay, you're gonna do that. What else do you want? Another 10, 20, or 30 acres? I think it's really as simple as that.
Okay.
So I guess.
So we don't have to
the
create
idea
a-
of
How
phasing it-
I, as a land manager, like, do my think about or
But-
approach this.
You have to, if you have to
So
come
it's hard
up.
for me to
if you-
conceptualize it this way.
If you want to get a quote from somebody, though, it is. And that's, I think, what we're really
Well,
looking for, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But here's a question, if you don't, and granted, I understand that that can't all be done at the same time, but if you only mitigate invasive species on 17 acres, how is that gonna work if they're in the rest of the acreage? Like,
It-
don't you eventually have to do?
it doesn't. Yes.
The whole,
You go little by little.
Yeah, I mean, you protect areas at a time. You can
Right.
reclaim
So you
and
have to
continue.
phase it, and
You
then you
have
have
to
to
phase
get
it.
to all of it.
so either way, it's not just the acreage that they're proposing here. That'd be one
But
place to
Tamika's
start,
point,
but then we would have to.
If we just want a today cost for this.
Yeah.
Let's pick something in the middle and get the cost and see what it
We
looks
could
like.
always scale
And
it
that-
up to what?
Yeah.
It's a bento box, we'll take it back out again.
I would say another area that's really valuable
The
from my
little red line on top.
thank you.
Yeah,
From
that's
my
it.
boots on the ground, this area has amazing milkweed pollinators. Yes, invasives are present, but like if this were a landowner who invited me to their property to give them unbiased recommendations, I would say you have something good going on here. Target this area to control invasives
Yeah,
first, you know,
and let the milkweed.
and here, though
So 13 and 20.
economically, that might not
17
be
and 20.
possible.
Well, let's
Yeah,
find out.
fine,
Let's
sure,
do
yeah.
17 and 20. You know, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to be cavalier about it. I'm just saying, I think it's
Yeah.
just a matter of giving them a number so that they can start working with us.
So
Yeah.
Andrea's point also about the management technique they're envisioning here, so the existing milkweed, you're not gonna rip
Culling
that all
it.
out and then put it back in.
Just like
You're
those-
trying to maintain what's
Right,
there.
I understand.
So we've got to say to them, you might have one type of management envisioned here, but what about working with what exists and only removing?
Similar to where they were proposing the pollinator pathway,
Yeah,
if I understand it correctly, there's a ton of white oak regenerating.
that's what, yes.
I would be so heartbroken to see that white oak take.
Yeah,
you
because
know,
the approach they're talking about is like stripping it down and letting it grow back.
No.
Seems.
I mean, the
like the
acorns are good.
community
They
is
can
not gonna be very
resprout
happy
deer.
about
I'm
that.
sure those
they're not.
oak seedlings are way older than we would think because of deer. You know, deer eat them up, and then
Yeah.
they grow a few inches, and then they keep them stunted like that. But I would say one of the most valuable things we could
Well, that was a
do
fairway where
is
those
put
are.
up a temporary deer fence in the area we want to be early successional or a meadow. Control the invasives in that area so that the natives have a time to grow without impact of herbivory.
Right.
And that has not been proposed.
Yeah, so that's a low approach, you know, like
A
a
low impact
impact.
approach.
Yeah.
Now, deer fence there is certainly a cost to that. And maintenance as well, but in this setting, the maintenance wouldn't be that bad.
So it sounds like it would be valuable for us to ask them to take that low maintenance approach and tell us what that would cost, rather than the approach they showed us, which is
I think so,
stripping it
because
down and-
I think that's more realistic.
in our
for
community,
us.
especially on this
And
property.
so I understand the value and getting the biggest dollar figure that you could so you can maybe scale it back. But I'm also trying to think realistically for us.
What
And I
approach
think
would we
our
take?
approach, especially in the first handful of years here, would be lower impact. Focusing on invasive control, focusing on controlling herbivory,
Yeah, but it would tell the community and signal to the community that we are taking care of the property.
Yeah.
So
And we're identifying in that
it's a
process
lower cost approach of doing that.
the habitat versus the park.
Right.
And the proper interface thereof.
Well, my hope is that if we could find a partner to do that.
Yes.
And it's not our cost,
Even
it's
better.
Yes.
the partner doing
And
it.
so that might be more valuable. I mean, is that something Cooper and Robertson can do for us? Find us some partners. What would that,
we can ask them if they can offer some suggestions. They've been pretty good at it so far.
yeah, like that might be
So-
more valuable
Yeah.
to us at this point than $1. And like, what would the cost of that be? You know?
Yeah. So I think if we say that for, in our area for the GS1, to say, a lower impact approach, and what is the market for partners, right? It's almost like the economic.
Yeah, this-
What I hear
Or
you saying,
partners
you want
and/or
a
grants.
And
management
grants.
plan, partner possibilities, and low impact,
Per
modest.
acre kind of thing.
mi-
Yeah.
you know.
Initial,
The acreage that
And a
remains in GS1?
And a
Look
prioritization,
at C, I'm just trying to go back just to number 2. I'm sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or
I
is it-
understand.
Are we back on the F, which is other, where you provide the acreage?
We're on the other.
Right?
Yeah, it's F, right?
F, okay. So then you would have to decide what the acreage totals you want them to look at.
So for the plan, and I don't think it's gonna be the same, so I think for the plan
Okay.
and for the potential partners, it would be whatever we're looking at in green.
Plan and partners for
It's like
open,
100 acres.
100-ish
100
acres.
plus acres, yeah.
for open space, minimally invasive, right?
Yeah, minimal
Impact.
impact management, not intensive
Yeah.
restoration work,
Yeah.
because that's
Not what
that's-
they presented to
yeah.
us.
Yeah.
It's very
At all.
expensive work.
Invasive.
Yeah, targeting, invasive
management.
control.
They presented it as an
Herbivory
option, though.
control.
They presented it as an option. They just said, this is what we did in one place.
I mean, we might need
You
to
know,
go
so-
out and
Yeah.
just
But I think
mark,
that's what
mark
they're
the
doing.
areas,
I think, yes.
yeah, and
And
mark
I
areas that we,
can.
yeah, it's easy enough to.
I just
Yeah.
wanna be
flag.
invited.
Yeah, no.
And this would be that, plan and partners for open space, minimal impact, invasive species control, et cetera, would be for all that remains in that GS1 area.
Yes.
Okay?
So the planning would be for all of those 100+ acres.
Okay.
It would, if I'm hearing people correctly, we would also appreciate some dollar figure associated with some number of acres of invasive control.
Yep. And then identifying partners and grant money.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd be
Because we're
curious.
not gonna be
again,
able to afford it, obviously.
maybe there's, in terms of getting dollars, maybe there's a market analysis or economic analysis of a park design, because this is really where, ideally, again, maybe a partner does that we've leased it to, but if it's given to us to then hire a contractor to create a great park in Woodbridge, I'd want to know those numbers. So, we had some of the ideas of the uses, a sculpture park, an arboretum. If that's going to be, now that's not going to be 100 acres, but a 100-acre sculpture park is not 100 acres of sculptures. It's a park that has trails, that has
Yeah.
walking trails through it. It has managed trees. It's not.
Good thought.
It's not all sculptures, but that's one of the things that could draw people to this place. You're walking and biking through this natural space, but then there are spaced out sculptures. The sculptures. That's
Well, in order to bike,
Could be a
though,
butterfly garden,
in order to
you
bike,
know.
we definitely need to design, where are the bike
That's what I
paths?
mean. That's what I mean. So that's
Butterfly
this.
garden, there's-
That's this overall design that needs to happen.
It can't just happen. Yeah.
Right.
You're gonna have to
Allison, what do you have on this one?
So that's it.
Okay, so, all I have so far for this one is GS1, we're gonna do green space F, which is other provide acreages. I have, plan and partners for open space, minimal impact plan that focuses on invasive species control for all 100 acres. And then for the second, I still don't know what you want me to say for your second method, because I'm looking at again, so.
I don't think there has to be a second. I
Well,
think.
it says
you have
17 acres of ecological restoration. The only example that doesn't give habitat restoration, because I know we're all, none of us really know what those words mean. But the one example that doesn't use habitat restoration lists things like pond, pollinator, meadow, and
Yeah.
riparian.
So-
riparian.
Right.
Why don't we do what you did and all, the second piece of it be B,
For 17 acres of the restoration.
which
Okay,
would be
B.
around the pond, Andrea, and the,
Yeah, but I'm saying no to that pollinator meadow as it,
Well,
you know.
we can cross
our
off- we can cross
pollinator
off
meadow.
Oh, yeah.
Our,
Okay.
you know, we want a
Okay.
pollinator meadow.
Just
Okay.
not
So-
maybe where they put it.
It
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
have to
Well,
go
and,
with that.
and
Or
maybe their
a different
technique
approach
of-
to it.
Right.
Right.
A different
Correct.
approach to it. So, Allison, the one thing I would say, so you had plan and partners for open space. Okay, I'm sorry, yeah. Plan,
For open space planning with minimal impact that focuses on invasive species control for all of what's left in the GS1 bubble.
And habitat management.
but the plan would be more, I'm just getting, the plan that we would want a cost associated with, like what would it cost to have this plan developed? Would encompass more than invasive control.
I think the management plan should be on its own.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It just
But
should be,
in the
we're
plan, it
looking
could
for a
identify partners.
Right.
So I would say have a plan that addresses 100+ acres, that helps us navigate habitat and park uses,
Design.
where to do what, design, integrates our approach to invasive species control, integrates our approach to herbivory control, and provides us with options of partners.
What's our approach?
Well, that would be determined by the plan, I'm saying. But our approach is generally, so if,
What do you mean by approach? Like the,
Is
In
it-
other words, we're saying our approach, so that means, so how are we doing it? Because if you're gonna price out, cost out anything, it's, so what does that entail?
Well,
So
what
are we
Andrea
talking about?
explained was like deer fences and removing invasives.
That's what I'm
but
getting at,
Leaving
yeah.
some things
Yeah.
there. So we
Yeah.
call
Yeah,
that
so-
low
Yeah.
impact,
I would call that low impact.
low impact management.
Yeah.
I just,
They'll know
so
what
they've
that
gotta,
means.
we've gotta explain to them what it
Yeah,
is we're
low
talking
impact,
about, so
right.
that we could.
Well, that's why they're coming back too,
So-
so.
So then the plan is one thing that we're getting a cost for. And then I just want to make sure.
And then we're
going
gonna test 17 acres to see what that cost is to actually
Okay.
do that
Yes.
plan.
So then we're also asking them to provide us with a dollar amount for 17 acres
Yeah.
of invasive control.
What
You
would
said
they
the
out?
ecological restoration.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever that.
Whatever
And then
that
we'll
may
ask them
look
for
like.
their
Okay.
definition of.
Okay.
No, that's
Okay.
fine. We don't-
Okay.
And then if it turns out,
Deal
Andrea,
with
then,
it in a few weeks.
and then if it turns out they
Well,
come
it'll be
with
before a few
something that's too intensive, we say, no, no,
You
no.
don't know what their words mean.
So,
I know.
Find out soon enough.
Allison, do you have that one?
It's like,
Have which one?
Do we have the last one? Are we complete with the last
Yes,
one?
I have open space plan with low impact, basic species control, a plan that would design spaces for park versus open space uses, integrates
Herbivory
thank you, I spelled
control.
it right. Herbivory control provides partner options. And then for the alternate use, I put B, 17 acres of ecological restoration.
Great, everybody's good with that.
Yeah, my
Now
one.
let's
I
go
do
to-
have one quick request, Allison.
Yep,
In the plan where you say helps determine park and design park and instead of open space, say habitat.
okay, habitat.
Thank you.
Design
'cause
park
it's-
spaces and habitat spaces.
Because
Yeah,
park.
because it's
All right, now what do we need, a
right.
motion?
It's holistic. Yeah, it's
Let's-
semantics,
let's-
but it's the
Allison,
whole
read,
places would be a
read what
part.
we have for the ARD2, because we combined that one.
Yep, hold on, let me just make the correction for Andrea. Okay.
Thank you, Allison.
All right, so I have Woodfield Road East, West, and GS2 combined for primary use as development. The top preferred is hospitality commercial. The alternative preferred is higher density, assisted living workforce houses, age restricted campus. And in the notes, also please weigh early childhood education possibilities on the property as it relates to the other areas.
And provide assessment of G2. GS2.
Yeah, I think she-
Oh, she said that? Okay.
Yeah, GS2
Well, she
is in-
included GS2,
Included
but you didn't
yes.
just, that we're looking for them to tell us why it can't be, if they're saying it can't be developed,
So
why?
then I'll put development / GS2 assessment.
Great. And then what do you have for D1?
Development, top preferred, low density housing senior. Numbers that show the difference between selling versus leasing that
Okay.
land. And then alternative preferred is low density housing varied. As you've said, we
For
should do-
workforce, another word that you can use on there?
Sorry.
That's okay.
And then I put as notes under your Ansonia Road East D1, the layout or preference of the map for B1 that has the road that comes off of Ansonia, okay?
Got it. And then AR1,
AR1, passive recreation, primary use, top preferred, history or nature center, grand park entrance, alternative preferred, agriculture.
everybody good?
Yes. One question, we're going back to GS1. I know I sent this in my comments to Cooper and Robertson, but does it need to be spelled out to explore maybe the benefit, the sale of an easement or some type of conservation restriction?
It's worth noting, just put it for GS1, under GS1,
Yeah, and all that,
And then the
Carbon
monetary
trade, yeah.
value
cost and
of-
value of easement or protection.
well, so that is where, when we said, for example, along Ansonia Road, housing or open space.
Yeah.
That's where we're gonna see the cost-benefit analysis of, oh, if you left it open space,
they
we've got to
provide-
value this
yeah.
in some way. Can't just say zero value.
Is everybody good with
So
everything
we'll
we
see it
said?
there.
Can I have a motion to accept this as?
I'll make a
written?
motion to accept.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we have any additional discussion on this? Hearing none, all in favor? Motion carries.
Not bad.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Wait, Ron, you gotta sign the call for the annual town meeting.
Oh,
You gotta
yes,
do
please,
the
before you leave.
receiving.
We have to sign it, or we don't have to do anything, we're adjourned.
You're adjourned, that's at 8:27, but before you get to leave.